morning and welcome to the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting today, Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. And I will turn it over to our general counsel to call the roll.
Chair Carroll,
Here.
Vice Chair Bland. Here. Commissioner Chapin. Commissioner Chen. Here. Commissioner Chu.
Here.
Commissioner Ginsburg. Here. Commissioner Goldblum. Commissioner Jefferson. Here. Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Master.
Here.
All right, good morning again, and welcome to the May 7th public hearing and public meeting of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. This meeting is being held in our public hearing room on the 9th floor of 1 Center Street. It is also being held via Zoom and live streamed on our YouTube channel for anyone who would like to just watch the proceedings. And we are going to begin this morning with a public meeting agenda to review a proposed rule and a proposal for storefront and signage changes that has already had a public hearing and is coming back today with some revised revisions. And then we will move to our public hearing agenda for new applications for work on designated properties. And with that, I will turn it over to Corey Harala, our Director of Preservation.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Start today's Preservation Department agenda with public meeting item number 1. This is a public meeting on proposed rules pursuant to City Administrative Procedures Act. Proposed amendments to Chapter 2 of Title 63 of the Rules of the City of New York, consisting of amendments to existing rules, including amendments relating to roadway and sidewalk cafes. This was last presented at the public hearing of April 16th, 2024. I'll turn it over to Leanne Pollock to go over the presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. At the public hearing on April 16th, we heard more about DOT's adopted outdoor dining rules, and the Commission received public comment on the proposed rule. Since then, staff has been carefully reviewing the comments and concerns raised by the public. We're going to walk through our responses and subsequent changes today. First, a quick reminder of our proposed approach to regulating outdoor dining. Essentially, we propose to codify and clarify our current practices relating to sidewalk cafes and to expand this approach to roadway dining setups. As we've explained, currently we do not substantively review applications for sidewalk cafes because of their temporary and ephemeral nature. We do not review the barriers, seating, umbrellas, color, etc. We only review full enclosures and anything that's attached to the sidewalk or to the building. As you saw at the hearing, DOT has extensive siting, design, height, and installation criteria for both types of cafes, as well as stringent limits on advertising. While sidewalk cafes can be up year-round, roadbed cafes can only be in place from April to November. Because of all these criteria and the seasonal, movable, and ephemeral character of the setups, neither sidewalk nor roadway cafes detract from the streetscape or significant exterior architectural features of the building. For these reasons, LPC's proposed rule would not require our review of sidewalk and roadbed cafes that comply with DOT requirements. The proposed rules would still require LPC permits for aspects of outdoor seating that attach to the building or to historic paving for compliance with LPC's current rules, and to make sure any penetrations and installations avoid damaging or concealing any architectural features. Elements that we would review would include awnings, lighting, conduit, etc. This type of regulatory approach, again, mirrors our current approach to sidewalk cafes and also our approach to public pay telephones and Link NYC kiosks. Recently, DOT also provided these additional renderings for roadway cafe prototype designs. We wanted to share them in order to show some of the variety and the flexibility that's possible within their regulations, and what sorts of setups can be used for specific locations, such as a particularly narrow or long frontage, a steep slope roadway, etc. So here are some options. So now to address public testimony. There were several comments about outdoor dining setups that were raised and that LPC believes are already addressed by the proposed rules or by DOT's criteria. Quality of life issues came up, including noise, sanitation, and adequate access to sidewalks. And these were all noted at the hearing. These concerns largely fall outside of LPC's purview, but were the impetus behind DOT pursuing and adopting specific criteria for these setups. Some commenters also stated that LPC should develop more expansive criteria covering all elements of outdoor dining setups, including things like movable barriers, umbrellas, fans, heaters, etc. Again, we currently do not review these sorts of installations unless they're attached to the building or paving. So otherwise, they're too ephemeral to regulate and will not meaningfully detract from the streetscape. The next grouping of comments dealt with concerns of the visual impacts of these structures. And commenters noted that they would significantly interrupt the streetscape and block views of storefronts and buildings. LPC staff disagrees. Roads are already busy and active spaces, and there's typically on-street parking that already precludes pristine views of the buildings. Specifically, there was mention that the roofs of the roadway cafes would be taller and solid, and optional vertical barriers like curtains would conceal the ground floor entirely. LPC just wants to reiterate that we think DOT's criteria sufficiently addresses these concerns. For example, the roadway setups can only be 8 feet wide, and roofing can only be installed between 7 feet over grade and 10 feet over grade. And vertical barriers have to allow for transparency and are limited to 6 feet in height only on the street-facing side. There can be no vertical barriers, again, on the ends of the cafe or adjacent to the sidewalk. The next category of comments dealt with requests for tighter regulation of finishes and colors, with a concern that some colors would have more of a visual impact than others. So first, I'd like to note that businesses can currently use any color for umbrellas, perimeter barriers, and other movable furniture at sidewalk cafes. Again, we don't regulate these elements. We don't look at their colors. We do review colors for awnings that are permanently attached to buildings. That's because these have a more permanent presence. They're physically attached to the building, so we're already reviewing them and issuing a permit. They have a direct contextual dialogue with the storefront and with the building above, and we will continue to review these even with the new proposed rules. For roadway cafes, staff believes that since the heights and dimensions of vertical elements are limited, the visible areas of colored elements will be modest and primarily too low to detract from the streetscape. Furthermore, views of the ground floor and buildings will still be open for pedestrians on the sidewalk who are walking between the roadway seating and the building. I finally just wanted to address some enforcement concerns, since this was also brought up in a few of the comments. DOT has publicly committed to a robust enforcement of the dining out rules, and they will be the primary lead on that. But if someone sees an issue with any of these installations within a historic district, they can still report them to LPC, and our enforcement staff will work with DOT to review them. The reports are tracked, and if we see significant, consistent issues with any aspect of the setups, we can always come back in the future and revisit the rules. Staff has identified one change to the proposed rules based on the public testimony. We had already proposed to limit or require review of any attachments to historic paving, and we had specifically identified bluestone and granite in the rules. Several groups brought to our attention that we should also include cast iron vault light panels, and we concur with that. Though I'll also note that DOT criteria already state that dining setups should not be physically attached to the sidewalk, road, or curb at all. So this is just reiterating again that LPC agrees that nothing should be attached to any type of historic paving. If voted on today, the proposed rule changes will be published in the city record. The rules will become effective 30 days after the publication. Mark and Corey and I are happy to answer any questions that you have, and thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any questions for Leanne or the team? Okay. All right, so I think we can just move to our discussion then. Thank you, Leanne and Corey and Mark, for carefully reviewing the comments and bringing this back to us today. And I want to note that, as Leanne said, we have long approved sidewalk cafes and always supported them because they do enliven the street, and currently do not regulate the movable aspects of sidewalk cafes. And so this proposed rule would codify that and then expand it to the roadway cafes, which of course became a feature during the pandemic and when there was an emergency order in place, which precluded our review at the time. So we are going to codify it for both in this rule. And I want to thank the Department of Transportation, who, as they worked very on their guidelines, worked very closely with our team, with Leanne and Corey and Mark, to ensure that the aspects of the guidelines would align with our approach and our historic district needs. So I want to thank them for that. And I think that's why we're in a place today where we feel very confident that this will have no effect on significant architectural features. And I also want to comment on the public testimony. And while we did hear concerns about color and finish and the roof coverings, I do want to thank all the public who supported our general approach to this. I think the approach that if you follow the guidelines, you do not need to come in for an LPC permit, I think is a very rational way to deal with this and supports our historic districts. And I do want to thank everyone who supported that approach. And I'm happy that we were able to make some adjustments in response to those comments. So if there are are there any other thoughts or comments on this? No, okay. So I think if we're ready to go ahead and make a motion, then I'll ask if Diana, Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion to adopt the rules?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thank you. And Mark, will you call the vote?
Carol,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland. Aye. Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 10 in favor and none opposed.
All right. Thank you all. So these rules are now adopted. And as Leanne said, will go into the city record and be effective within 30 days. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
All right, next item is public meeting item number 2, LPC 24-04256. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 629, Lot 1, 675 Hudson Street in the Gansevoort Market Historic District. A vernacular neo-Grec style factory building built in 1849, enlarged in 1854 to 60 and altered again circa 1884. The application is to modify masonry openings, replace storefronts, and repaint a portion of the ground floor, establish a master plan for the installation of painted signage, install marquees, place storefront cornices, sills, and lintels, install rooftop mechanical equipment and enlarge bulkheads, and remove an interior floor. This was last presented at the public hearing of January 30th, 2024. No action was taken at that time. The applicants will present revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
Let's go ahead and do that now. Commissioner Chu, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, the applicants may speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. Cass Stack, the Board of Higgins, Grace Barth and Partners, joined by Matt Moran of Mancini Duffy and my colleague Shreya Betty from Higgins Grace Barth. We presented this project to you back in January, and there were specific comments which we believe we've addressed and incorporated them into what we think is an improved presentation that we're eager to share with you this morning. The building at 675 Hudson Street, you can see in the historic district map on the right, bound on the south by 13th Street, on the west 9th Avenue, on the east Hudson Street, and then a small one-bay elevation, as you can see in the photograph on the left on 14th Street, a prominent building on the edge of the historic district. An aerial view here illustrates, I think, its position, relatively low scale, but low scale in a district that is characterized largely by a lot of low scale buildings. Some existing condition photographs, just to remind you of the context right to left. The right image is the elevation along Hudson Street, which has a range of different configurations and infill across the base. On the left edge of the photograph, you can see a portion of the base has been painted. The 13th Street elevation in the middle of the photograph, all of the base of the building has been painted on that side. And then that wraps around the corner on the far left image is the elevation along 9th Avenue, where the southern quarter of the building has a base that has been painted. But you can also see in this photograph street furniture and the plaza that is part of the Gansevoort Market bid, large planters and things that obscure the base of that building. You'll also notice, of course, the removal that happened perhaps 100 years ago or more of the cornice at the top of the building, which is part of the restoration program that's integrated into the overall proposal. Turning to two renderings now of the previous proposal on the left and where we are today in our revised proposal. I'll just remind the commissioners of some of the comments from the January public hearing. I think significantly, there was a very consistent thought about the building becoming, quote, too sanitized, that there was a preference for more of a sort of haphazard treatment to sort of retain some of the messy character of the building. And one of the commissioners noted that this building depicts the sort of the layering of time throughout the various elevations, and that was a positive. And there's a request to keep those differences exposed as part of the new work. And I think, as you'll see in this presentation, that is very characteristic of the historic district itself. And we've made an attempt to preserve those, and in the changes that we're making, sort of honor that history of the historic district. Specifically, I think from left to right, you can see that the program for upper floor painted signage significantly changed. The banding that the commissioners were concerned altered the reading of the building has been changed now, and you'll see this in the presentation. It's much more prescriptive in the way this is done. There are either 3, 6, or 9 panels in very specific locations, very specific dimensions, specific colors that can exist on each of the 3 elevations, and we'll go through that in just a moment. So the amount of signage has been reduced. The base of the building also, where we were proposing to overpaint the entire base of the building, we are now only leaving the painted base on the 13th Street side as is, and allowing tenants to overpaint that. But the balance of the base of the building will remain unpainted, except for the areas where signage would be adjacent to building entries, and a few select areas that will be painted directly onto the brick. And then finally, we've reduced the number of enlarged openings. This was a comment from the commissioners where the request was not to see a wholesale introduction of widened storefront bays. So they've been eliminated completely on Hudson Street and retained on 13th Street and 9th Avenue, as you'll see in the elevations. Together, I think these changes result in a building like so many others in the Gansevoort Market Historic District that reflect the history of adaptive reuse that is a characteristic of the district. So just a quick summary slide again of the various areas of work. On the roof, an enlarged elevator bulkhead to provide a code-compliant elevator, mechanical equipment on the roof that's largely not visible or minimally visible, restoration of the cornice along 9th Avenue, and an extensive program of masonry restoration across the upper floors of all 4 elevations, brick masonry repairs, replacement of lintels and sills and cast stone. And then coming down the building, sort of a refinement and a reduction in the signage program, and then across the base, new infill in existing bays and enlarged bays, and signage limited to the base, and then painting just on that far end on the left side along 13th Street. Comparative elevations on the left side are the images that we shared with you back in January. On the right are images of our revised proposal. So the top pair are along Hudson Street. You can see that we've eliminated the 2 expanded bays. There's a building entry on the left. Point this out. This is a building entry that leads to a small lobby, and this was a commercial retail storefront. Those have been eliminated, and the existing openings will remain in their current size. As well, you can see the base is only remaining painted where it is currently painted, and then signage is just applied on top of that, whether it's on top of the existing painted brick or directly onto the brick as requested by the commissioners. I'll also point out the signage program, which has different permutations based on 1 or 2 tenants across the ground floor, and we'll get into a bit more detail on that. The elevations across the base of the slide illustrate changes on the 9th Avenue side, and again, I'm reminding the commissioners, the 9th Avenue side is the side that faces into the district. It has a very different character on 9th Avenue than Hudson Street. We would like to retain the enlarged openings on that elevation as proposed, also recognizing that there are fixtures and elements along the sidewalk plane that obscure views actually back to the building. So having a little bit more transparency and visibility in and out is important to the new uses of the building. And then, of course, similar changes on the upper floors for the signage program. And then on 13th Street, similarly, eliminating the banding across the base of the building that the commissioners all felt changed the reading of the building to just 3 distinct prescribed locations between the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors. And then at the base, retaining the painted base as it is today, we'd like to allow a variety of colors that a tenant would choose to overpaint that existing area of brick masonry. And then the two openings at the middle elevation with the smaller bays retained on either the east and west ends of that elevation. Thinking a bit broadly about the district itself, in many ways, the Gansevoort Market Historic District is really about evolution. Changes of uses and the way the building stock in the district was adapted over time. And we put this slide together just to illustrate across the top row how 675 Hudson Street has changed over time, as well a series of images illustrating different locations throughout the district. And the historic designation report for the district characterizes the evolution in 4 distinct phases: early development, the Gansevoort Market phase, the meatpacking district phase, and then finally the last phase, which is just called the present, which is basically 1970 onward. And each phase has a very sort of distinct character. The earliest phases, obviously early buildings, row house scale buildings, small industrial buildings like 675 Hudson on the upper left. But on the lower left, you can see row house buildings that were first residences and then adapted for various commercial uses. The Gansevoort Market District, the slide on the bottom, illustrating the market itself just outside the boundaries of the district on Washington Street, but you can see the vibrancy and intensity of activity and the way the buildings were adapted. 675 Hudson at that time was used for warehousing. The tenancy in the building in the late 19th and early 20th century were butter, eggs, and cheese distributors and other market uses. The meatpacking district, which was characterized by a different sort of distribution tying into truck traffic and rail links. You can see the truck traffic in these market buildings on the lower band of the slide, but also in the upper portion, the 3rd phase, where 675 Hudson was then adapted for different uses, sort of industrial uses. There were trucking companies that actually had their offices in the upper floors, and a motor works at the ground floor. And then finally, the last phase, which represents sort of first a decline from the 1970s of sort of activity, and then this rebirth through new uses that came into the district, nightclubs, restaurants, and now sort of a retail commercial presence. And the image on the upper right, I think, just illustrates 675 in this period from the 1980s, completely painted, but showing this sort of new vitality that is so emblematic of the district from the late 20th century into the beginning of this 21st century, which we think is characterized well by this slide at the lower right of this addition on top of the building over on Washington and 13th Street, just illustrating how the district and even the way the commissioners have regulated the district sort of supports these changes, the new uses throughout these historic buildings. I also want to just touch on historic signage because there was a discussion in January at the public hearing about using historic images to support proposed signage. And I understand the concern, but I think what's particular about the Gansevoort Market Historic District, not only is its sort of intense, vibrant commercial nature, but I think particularly painted signage in this district was done differently than other historic districts. So you're familiar probably with wall signs in Soho and maybe to a lesser degree Ladies Mile and even Tribeca. But I think in those districts, wall signs were typically on lot lines, on side elevations, but in the Gansevoort Market District, wall signs were not only on side elevations, but they were across primary street-facing frontages. And I think that's a distinction that I think is important to make, and it supports this idea that this district since the 1880s has been very much about this sort of vibrant commercial activity. And I think these images are not meant just sort of a simple like if then, they were there now, so they're appropriate, in the future. But I think they go to the essence of what this district is about. It's about sort of commercial activity and commercial vitality. And so we've collected these images just to remind, they were in the other presentation, but I think it's important to sort of frame this proposal, which has been reduced from what you saw before, but to understand how wall signage on street facades in this district are particularly appropriate given this history. So you saw this image, but the building in the 1980s with this sort of last phase of development from the 1970s onward had this new vitality. It had different uses than the building had under the meat market district or the Gansevoort market district. The building in the 1980s had nightclubs across the base, had different uses on the upper floors. And of course, the vitality of the activity in the district was changing as restaurants were coming in. Florent came in the 1980s. It became a different place, but just as important. And then other images from the 20th century, these sort of small scale row house buildings row house scale buildings on 9th Avenue, just on the northern edge of the district, where the front facade is completely painted with wall signage on all the spandrels. This building on Gansevoort Street, similarly, where each spandrel was painted for tenancy. And then this image here, looking west on Little West 12th Street. And so obviously Rubel Coal and Ice, which was a major tenant in the neighborhood, had its giant wall sign on the side elevation, but more significantly, I think the Mo Levy and Sons, which was this small scale building right on the corner, had painted signage both on the 9th Avenue facade across its entire facade, but also wrapping, it's a little hard to see in this image, but wrapping the corner on the Little West 12th Street side. So wall signs existed on side elevations, but in this district in particular, wall signage extended across front facades, which was really about the activity that was going on in the district. So returning back to what you saw previously and your concerns about the impact of the signage as it was previously presented, and then turning to our proposed elevation. So this series now shows the different options that we're proposing for wall signage. If there's a single tenant, the signage will be in this location. We're much more prescriptive about location and color. The paneling, the back panel is a prescribed historic color from the Benjamin Moore collection. It's a sort of light cream, and we're suggesting or proposing just a dark finish on top of that. So this would be typical signage for a single tenant that would exist along the the 9th Avenue elevation. If there are one or two tenants, this scheme could be used. And again, it's prescriptive in terms of the dimensions and placement of the signage. So the signage becomes really secondary to the facades, where the volume of the building is clearly legible and is secondary to the overall reading of the building. And I'll just point out in these elevations, we have different colors at the base here, the variety of colors that could be used as overpaint over the existing paint at that end of the building. And then if there are one or two tenants, again, if there's a single tenant, they could use these signs. So think about the REI store at the Puck building, where REI is the single tenant, but there are signs all the way around the base of that building indicating skiing, hiking, cycling. This could be, if there's a single tenant, they wouldn't have their same sign repeated 9 times, but they might be indicating the different products that they sell inside. Similarly, if there are two tenants, one tenant would have these 3 signs, and the other tenant would have these. So there's a little flexibility built into this, but it's considerably more prescriptive and limited from what you saw previously. Flipping around to the Hudson Street side, again, if there's a single tenant, the signage would be in this location, in each of these spandrels. One or two tenants, this arrangement. Again, one or two tenants, this arrangement. And then coming around to the 13th Street side, this is the exclusive arrangement. Again, prescriptive, limited, secondary to the overall brick masonry of the elevation. And then finally, some specifics on the guidelines. So again, on the left are the specific guidelines and parameters for the wall signage on the upper portions of the facade, and on the right are the sign panels that would go in the piers at the base of the ground floor. So there are specifics about the dimensions. On the left, a call out for the color, this Wyndham Cream, this HC6, which would be the back panel for the signage with a dark letter on that panel, specifics about its position relative to the lintels and sills above, and about the dimensions. And then on the right, the guidelines and parameters indicate either dark text on a light background or light text on a dark background to allow for contrast. But again, to allow a little bit more flexibility at the base of the building as tendencies change. And then again, specifics about the positioning of those painted sections and the standoff from the jambs of the storefronts. So again, limited and also more prescriptive. And then finally, just a series of renderings going around the building. The little inset on the upper left corner is the matching view from the January public hearing, and then obviously the larger view is the current proposal. So looking south along Hudson Street, I think the reading of the building is primary here, and the interventions across the base are very much secondary, as well as those on the upper floors. So this is a single tenant option here on the Hudson Street side, and again, a different color, just to suggest a range of colors across the base of the building that a tenant would be able to choose. And then continuing to the 13th Street side, so this would be a single tenant with 3 signs on each elevation. And then getting into the 2 tenant or 2 sign options here across the base on Hudson Street, on 9th Avenue, and then on 13th Street. And then finally, the 3 tenant scheme, the 3 sign scheme with either a single tenant or 2 tenants, the view on Hudson Street, on 9th Avenue, and 13th Street. So I think the changes that we've made have attempted to respond to your comments from January. Obviously, across the base, we've limited the amount of overpainting. This area of the building is currently painted. That would be the extent of the painted masonry. We've reduced the number of enlarged openings, focusing them on the portions that face into the district on 13th and 9th Avenue. Considerably more prescriptive on the signage in the upper floors. And all of this is an effort to reveal the layering of this building over time, but also to expose those changes and to introduce new ones in sympathetic and appropriate ways.
Thank you. We have questions? Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
So I have a number. I'll start out with a easy one. For the part that's base that's painted,
Yes,
the existing color seems to be a dark green.
yes.
Is there a reason you're not proposing just to keep that color?
So I think because there are no tenants, we'd like flexibility to allow the tenant that comes in to paint it a color of their choosing. I think, from the historic photographs, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of color photographs, but those that we do show a pretty broad range, yellow, pink, red. So I think in this limited area down at the sort of southern 20% of the building, we'd like to allow for flexibility for a range of colors.
And would that color have to go to staff to be approved?
Yes, the idea would be it would be part of a filing for the tenant's work, but it would go to the staff.
Other set of questions I have, which is, are you just expanding openings on 9th Avenue?
These 2 on 13th Street would also be expanded. The one on the left is actually currently infilled with brick. I have existing photos in the appendix, which I can run down to. And then the one to the right here would be expanded, but these bays, these would remain. So really, it's primarily 9th Avenue, and then these 2 on 13th.
So but it looks like on 9th Avenue, every bay is being expanded.
Correct.
Okay.
So just to clarify that, or just make sure I understood, the 2 center openings are widened openings, but the 2 at the one end on the left and the 3 on the right are existing openings, or openings to be restored to open. Okay. Other questions? Yes, Commissioner Chu.
Yes, the options for signage, you said that you have there's 1, 2, and 3 location options on 9th and on Hudson. And if it were a single tenant, they could choose to hold all 3 as well.
Correct.
And why would a tenant ever want less than just to take the full version? I guess I'm asking, why is it not just the full option?
I think, for a single tenant, why would they?
They have the option to take the maximum number as well.
Right. I mean, I think, again, different tenants are going to have different products and different signage ideas. So I use the example of REI. If there was, a company that had multiple products, maybe they'd want to have, or activities that they support, they might want to have 6 or 9 different, pieces of type. If there was, a tenant that had maybe fewer offerings, they might just have that on 3 bands. So I think it builds flexibility for the tenant, for which we don't yet know who's going to be occupying the building, or what kind of uses and products they're going to have, or things that they're going to be.
Could they
representing.
repeat their name?
So the way
9
we,
times on the
No,
facade?
no, well, in the guidelines, we're specific that you can't have any more than, they can't repeat any more than 3 times.
More than 3
So
times.
if it was this scheme, 3 would be,
On one facade?
so it is limited, so you're not gonna have the same sign repeated,
Okay.
9
And
times.
the locations of, you've explained that the runs of the signage vary, and that's been carefully composed to be, because I noticed sometimes it locks to the end of the window, and sometimes it's in the middle, and sometimes it's a quarter over. I'm assuming that's been looked at from a composition perspective, and that's the proposal
Right.
overall. I mean, I will comment that when you lock the signage to the end of windows, it tends to create a more vertical reading than when it floats out between the windows, which I feel does reference the traditional horizontal language.
We're certainly flexible
Okay,
in terms of where
Okay.
these end, and even
Okay.
to a certain extent, the lengths.
and so font is gonna be up to the brand of the tenant.
Right, so the base color will be consistent, so
Mhm.
it's this cream color, and there'll be a dark color on that, but then the fonts, as is, for a typical signage master plan, there isn't a prescription to what font a tenant would use, in a typical storefront master plan. So this would be similar.
Okay, and if there were awnings requested per the tenants on the Hudson side, which I would assume, because it's a huge plaza, right? On the other side of the building, on the Hudson side.
Right.
No, I'm sorry. The Ninth Avenue side?
To
The
the,
plaza's on the Ninth Avenue.
Not Ninth
Not-
Avenue
yeah.
side. There's a huge deep pond. It's become essentially a pedestrian plaza, which is great.
Yeah.
And I'm sure they're gonna want awnings on it, but that'll come as separate applications.
that would be a separate application and may be eligible for a staff level
Okay.
approval. So, but just to follow up on his question of Commissioner Chu's question about the color. So they can choose either a white background with a dark font or a dark background with a light font. But does it have to be, so say they are doing the 9 signs,
Yeah.
would they have to be consistent in that approach?
So the signage on the upper floors is a consistent cream background, dark lettering. That is,
Okay,
there's no variety. It's only at the base
got
where
it.
it can be a light, and that's where there's more sort of pedestrian activity. And so, what we've tried to do is sort of balance, I think, some of what was expressed back in January to maintain the sort of ad hoc, haphazard, messy quality of the building, but to also respond to the desire for something a little bit more restrained and restrictive. So that's the balance we're trying to make. So on the upper floors, it's a little bit more simple and monochromatic in terms of the cream and the dark color. And on the base, there's a little bit more color variety allowed, which I think is sort of typical, even the way buildings were historically signed.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Lutfi.
Okay, so the base. So the signs on the, the vertical signs with the font, reading the way it reads. So I believe that you said that if there's a single tenant, if there's not a single tenant, is this considered the signage for the tenant?
So let me go back.
Where does, let's say, let's say Lululemon, forget about REI for a minute. Let's say Lululemon wants a small store. Where is their signage?
So.
And what are their constraints?
Sure. So the southern,
And it's
Half-
small. They're not taking up the whole space.
Uh,
Okay.
so the way that the base, the ground floor has been planned is really 2 tenants.
Mhm.
There's a central connecting corridor line. So this is the building entry here.
Mhm.
So there's building signage here. That's
Mhm.
for the building address. And
Got
that
it.
connects through to that. So this would be the smaller retail space down here in the southern.
Okay.
The northern end is a little bit darker. So let's say they take this end,
Right.
and so these would be their signs, and that would be their sign. So this is building signage. And then this tenant would have these signs.
Okay, I got the top, but you're saying the signage is
So they have one.
the horizontal signage is what, there's horizontal signage? There's no horizontal signage.
Right, no,
It's just that.
And there's painted signage, I can run down the existing photos, but there's painted signage in this location and along 13th Street over the painted base of the building. So we're just basically suggesting that the tenant can continue to use that. There's a bigger coffee shop right now that has signage in that location. There was a restaurant on this corner that used signage on top of the paint, and so we're just suggesting that tenant down on that end gets to reuse those areas.
So can you show me what that looked like? And also, are you sure you're going to get two tenants?
It's likely one or two.
It's likely one or
It's not
two.
likely more than.
And so I just also, so then one of the tenants can paint the bottom white and the other could paint it green if they wanted. Is that correct? Could
Well-
paint their portion of
The
the,
brick, none of the brick at the base of the building that is not currently painted will be painted.
okay,
That was very specific. That was something you all felt very strongly about. back
Yeah.
in here. So
Right.
only the area here on 13th Street that is currently painted
can be painted.
Everything from this point north, which is
Mhm.
unpainted, will remain unpainted.
Right,
And down here on 13th Street, so you can see, it's actually a little more than what we're showing. So there's signage on all of these piers,
Mhm.
and here, and that's actually we're showing less signage. So we're showing less signage that is there now, but this is sort of changeable painted signage, paint on paint, as the tenants change. And so again, you all were very specific about what you wanted to see in terms of that signage, being, you were good with it on brick down on the areas where it wasn't painted, and understood that the southern 20% or whatever of the building where it is currently painted, could be repainted with.
Mhm.
The idea is to just sort of limit it to, select areas relative to the tenants.
Got it.
Okay, Vice Chair Bland.
Are there examples in the current district of painted wall signs that you're referencing populated the district in previous century?
So I can tell you, I can't show you. But for instance, there's a big wall sign that Sephora has in the corner of, it's 13th Street, is actually just. It's like sort of just diagonally across from this corner. So there was historically a wall sign on that street elevation, it's a corner building facing onto 13th Street. And there's a new sign that occupies the full height. Not a lot line. It's not a lot line. It's on the street facing facade. I brought this to the commission 10 or 15 years ago. It is still there. It's sort of, it inspired, it's a sort of, it's simple, it's black and white. And it's, occupies all 3 floors of that row house. Row house scale building, I should say. There are certainly wall signs on side elevation throughout the district, but that is one that I know that we brought forward some time ago.
West Coast. Remember your building, Nick? Didn't you work on that? Commissioner Ginsburg?
One other, on the 9th Street facade, there seemed to be 3 entrances, and I thought the entrance for the above was not on the 9th Street facade. Am I misunderstanding that?
So there are, this is the building entry.
Okay,
So there's signage on
right.
either side. That's
Mhm.
for this tenant space and this.
Thank
So
you.
That's anticipating 2 tenants or at least 2 entries for 1 tenant.
Yes, Commissioner Chen.
Since there's a discussion about the sensitivity to sanitize a version, or the word messy is the preferred, or to regularize, does it make sense to eliminate the top band? You know, because right now you have this very modular, regular 3 bands across all the facades, which make it very, very symmetrical and does it make sense to make it the sign bands are only on the lower 2 floors, the lower 2 bands?
I'm not sure that I agree that it sort of regularizes things, and I think in a, you know, in this scheme where there are 3 signs, but I think also looking, let me just go to the 2, sorry. You know, this, I think the sort of asymmetry of this actually sort of adds a little bit of life and, let's say, messiness. So I think these signs, the way we've revised this now, they are, in my eye, really secondary to the reading of the elevation. So, and I think they will continue to be so as a feature sort of added to this field of brick. So I'm not sure that the 3 signs and the single tenant arrangement creates a sort of a sanitized reading. I think you read the building and then it happen to be signs on it.
So following up on that, if you had a single tenant and they wanted to do option 2 or 3 on 9th Avenue, they could still do option 1 on Hudson, right? Or do they have to, like, is option 3 9
I think
on all
we
facades?
hadn't thought that, but that's a good suggestion. I think that I'm sure we'd be happy to do that because it actually allows for a little more flexibility. So if they wanted 3 signs on Hudson Street, but 6 on 9th Avenue, we would certainly be fine with that. It would allow for a reduction in the overall signage and would allow flexibility too.
Right, or maybe you can't have option 3 on all sides or something. Okay. Other questions? All right, not seeing any other questions, so I think we'll move to our discussion then. So thank you for the very thoughtful response to our comments. And as you stated, we did have comments about the widening of the openings at the ground floor, the painting of the base of the ground floor where it isn't painted, and the amount of, and the banding of the signage on the upper floors. And I think the result was not only the sanitized look, but also this sort of branded look that that you all had concerns about. And so we asked them to look at the openings that they were proposing to widen. They are proposing now to not widen any on 9th Avenue, 2 on 13th Street, and then to widen the others on Hudson, sorry, not on Hudson Street, but on 9th Avenue. And then limiting the paint to where it currently exists, limiting the painted signage to vertical piers at the ground floor with specific tonal requirements. And then the signs on the upper floors have multiple options ranging from 3 signs to 9 signs per long facade. And then I think 3 are on 13th Street. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Ginsburg, would you like to start this one?
So first of all, this is an improvement, and before I have one area that I think the signage is fine. The one thing I question is expanding all of the openings on 9th Avenue. And as I counted, there are 9 openings, 3 of which are door openings. And of the other 6, and I'm curious what other commissioners say, I'd like to see 2 or 3 that keep the existing opening. And obviously the exact rhythm and how one deals with that would be something to study and work with staff, but that would be my one comment, but I'm also curious what other commissioners feel.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I sort of in agreement. I also think that they should work with staff when it comes time to actually determining the number of tenants and we have a very good staff here, so I would defer to the staff.
Okay. All right. So, but the signage number is not determined by the number of tenants. So either tenancy could have the options. Okay. Okay, Vice Chair Bland.
I'm still struggling a bit with this concept of philosophy, really, of if they did it in the past, it's okay to replicate it in the future. It could be in a less mature city with less regulations, and just 100 years ago, it could have been inappropriate then too. It's just that there were no rules against it, and so that people did it. I find signs all over buildings to be a problem for me, just an aesthetic problem. Even if they were in this district in the past, they're not prevalent in this district currently. I guess I'm coming down to the fact that there's still these bands up top are a little a problem for me. But also, I just love the concept, the philosophy here that we have used for probably the duration of our history here, that if it was done in the past, it's okay to kind of use it as the precedent for doing it now. So I think that needs to be tested over time philosophically by the commission. I would not, in my own ideas here, but not eliminate all that signage. I would just maybe eliminate it except for the one banding on the second floor level. Regarding the openings, wider openings, I think Commissioner Ginsburg expressed it well. That I think he said at least 2 or 3 of the 9 or so would remain unchanged. I think that makes sense. And I think the colors that are being suggested are also sensible.
Okay. Commissioner Lutfi.
So I want to thank the applicant for listening to what we said and responding accordingly. And I think a lot of what you've done works. I do happen to agree that this is about the building now. And that to the extent that we make sure we don't distract from the building by getting rid of the ribbons all the way around and making the signage more understated, but consistent in terms of what was there from a coloration and font standpoint. I think that all works. So on the upper part of the building, I'm okay with what's being proposed. But I would like to extend that to the lower part of the building as well. So I feel like wherever there is going to be paint, it should actually be the same color, and let the tenants use their signage to differentiate themselves. That's not an uncommon thing in buildings of all types. And I'm still a little confused about like there's a lot of times tenants are putting signage in their windows, so I'm assuming that is going to happen, and I'm not sure what our role is in that, if any. I'm just guessing there may ultimately be a little bit of a problem with these vertical bands, but I'm not sure for the tenant, not for me, but I'm thinking of, the end user. I also think the signage on I'm still on signage. I think that entry signage, just the size of the font looks a little too large to me, and I would work with staff a little inelegant on that to make it, fit within the context and everything else we're doing in the building. And then I also agree with Commissioner Ginsburg about the number of openings on the 9th Avenue size. They could be a decrease, because that, I think, detracts from the integrity of what was there. Otherwise, thanks for doing a good job.
Thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Yeah, I'm in agreement with what my fellow commissioners have said. I do want to say that, thank the applicant for listening to the last session and make revisions to this. I do think that I can see that the current proposal does respect the building mass as brick building. And it does, it's better than the very strongly horizontal reading that the previous version does. I will say that I do feel that on the Hudson Street, that when I see the 9 locations, it does feel like a lot. I think that when you're facing the Plaza shopping district, it makes more sense. So I'm saying that on the Hudson side, I would prefer the 1 or 2 location. And I do like the asymmetric version that was shown because it expresses movement, which is a lot of what Hudson is about. 9th Street is really more about pedestrian and shopping. I think that's more appropriate. In terms of the openings, I agree with Commissioner Ginsburg's comment about the 9th Street side and that the center opening should be retained to keep the consistency above and below. I think that keeping the brick expression on the ground floor is a huge improvement, especially when you approach going south. You really see the point of the building and its mass is revealed as a brick triangular volume. Otherwise, I think anything else. In terms of the color of the retail at the base of 13th, is that something that would come as an application if a tenant wanted to propose? Or is that, are we openly allowing any color at this point?
This would.
Yeah, I think the
It would
staff
come
would
back.
review that if it was deemed that it would, the staff felt that it would detract from the building, it was
Come back
atypical,
like
then.
acid
we would have
green
to
or
bring it
something.
back.
Right, so there would be some staff review of that.
Okay,
Okay,
all right.
great. Commissioner Master.
Yeah, I also agree that the applicant was very responsive. And I think they did a great job in, really respecting the building. I'm fine with the bands of signage that they have on the building. I think that they've shown historically that, it's appropriate in this district. I actually agree with Commissioner Chu. I think he made a really good point that on the 9th Street facade, that you can have the perhaps up to 9 signs, but that on the other side, the Hudson side, maybe limit it to just not 9, I guess, a maximum of 6. I thought that was a very good suggestion. On the base, I think that limiting the paint to the areas where it exists now is excellent. And I understand that the paint color would be subject to staff approval. So I think that's fine. And in terms of the masonry opening, I think that when they eliminated the extra masonry openings on Hudson Street side, I think that they were very responsive. On the 9th Avenue side, given that it's more of a retail and a pedestrian, facing street, I actually think that it's important to have the option of keeping it open because, you have tenants who have retail needs and, they do need to display, perhaps their goods, their signage or whatever. And with this adaptive reuse, you do want to make it as tenant friendly as you can. So I would be more open to keeping the masonry openings on the 9th Avenue side.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
In this historic district, this shape of this building is unique. It's a special building. It's been a special building for a long time. So I think it can accept this different design approaches to it. I think the base, I can accept the openings, but I wish they had made it align with the existing verticals and elevation of the rest of the building. It just seems haphazard the way they put it in. And if they could condense that, I thought they put in the cornice to say, this is a dividing line, and below that I can do whatever I want. But I don't think that's possible. I think they should keep the continuous rhythm, the vertical rhythms, and make alignments as much as they can, should be done. The signage, you know, this building can absorb signage, and the signage is really refreshing. This is a triangular building. It's kind of unique. It can absorb funkiness, you know, it can absorb history. It can, and still keep its identity, I think. In terms of the color, that piece of color on the what side on the portion that's been painted before, I could accept that. That's fine.
Okay. Especially knowing that it will come to the staff. All right, Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I think this is very improved in many respects, and I'm happy to see the reduced signage and the replacement of the cornice and the sign band. And I think that, yeah, the color of the brick should be somewhat restrained, but if that's going to be reviewed with staff, I don't have any problem, whatever color it might turn out to be. So on the matter of how many signs, in some ways, I think that this would be better off really with, sorry, just a second level signage, because it would be more clear that it's attached to the retail right below it. Because, I mean, are they going to have 3 signs above the same tenant, the same thing? That seems very redundant. At the same time, if they were to have different tenants, then that would be confusing. So I would kind of see having, you know, the one sign above each tenant around the building. But it is a big building, and it could, I think it could absorb more. So, you know, I'm okay with going with whatever the majority thinks on that. And I agree with Commissioner Ginsburg and other commissioners about the comments on the openings. Thank you. Sorry.
Great. Commissioner Goldblum.
Okay, thank you. I guess I haven't had my caffeine hasn't kicked in yet, because I'm fine with it as is, actually. I think it's but obviously, you know, I'm also okay with the changes that others suggest. And the thing that hooked me in our very interesting conversation was Fred's question about what are we doing? And it made me think of the Met, where there's a really interesting exhibit up, and I think it's still up, where on the main level where the classical sculptures are, they have replicas of the sculptures as they were painted. And you know, I think we're all used to seeing these buildings, especially those of us in the architecture business, as these kind of pristine objects that have this kind of structural integrity that derives in some way from our modernist roots, you know, and that's not the vibe that these buildings had. And Fred's question, therefore, should we still keep it? I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. In a way, it's kind of our job in a funny way, and it makes me think of what we did this morning with the street cafe things. There was never a time in the history of New York City, other than the last 4 years, when streets were occupied by cafe structures. Yet we're good with that. So it's clear that we're not going for a simulacrum of 1894 in our streets or in our streetscapes, but the buildings are meant to kind of contrast with the people and the street furniture and the other junk that is of the moment. And I think that having a recollection of the sense of roughness and excitement and somewhat more unfettered quality that those signs represented is a good thing. And I think that this is a little bit tame for my taste, and I think that the controls should be looser, but there you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your thoughtful comments. And I have been taking notes and counts. And I think that where we are today is that we can go ahead and approve this with a couple of modifications. One is, I think that the majority of the commissioners do want to see 2 to 3 bays on 9th Avenue kept, and that rhythm to be worked out with staff. And understanding that a couple people did think it would be better to reduce the signs on Hudson, it seems like we have enough votes to approve the signage plan as proposed. And I think that really is it. It's approval with keeping 2 to 3 bays on Hudson and working out the rhythm of those openings with the staff. Great.
With regards to LPC 24-04256, 675 Hudson Street, Gavensport Market Historic District. A vernacular neo-Grec style factory building built in 1849, enlarged in 1854 to 60, and altered in 1884. Application is to modify masonry openings, replace storefront, and repaint a portion of the ground floor. Establish a master plan for installation of painted signage, install marquee, replace storefront cornice, sills, and lintels, install rooftop mechanical equipment and enlarge bulkhead, and remove an interior floor. I note that the building style, scale, material, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Gavensport Market Historic District. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the combination of masonry openings at 13th Street facade will only remove a limited amount of plain brickwork and will not substantially reduce the solid to void ratio in the building space. That only the southern portion of the first floor that is currently painted will remain painted, leaving the majority of the brick at the first floor exposed. That the proposed black painted metal storefront framing will be in keeping with other storefronts found throughout the historic district, and the change in material from wood will not call undue attention to itself. That the proposed metal and glass marquee with modest signage and a black finish will be anchored to the building at the modern storefront infill and will be scaled to the entrance and will be in keeping with the simple design of modern marquees installed at buildings of similar age and style found elsewhere within the historic district. That the historic precedent exists for painted signage on the building facade as evidenced by historic photographs and ghost signs, and that the proposed painted signage featuring a white background and light tan background and dark lettering will be in keeping with the presence and tradition type of historic painted signage found at this building. That the proposed building wide replacement of the brownstone lintels and sills is warranted by the deteriorated condition, and the use of cast stone as a substitute material will not be discernible from the street. That the stair and elevator bulkhead at the roof will only be enlarged the minimum amount necessary to meet the building code, and the gray metal cladding will be in keeping with the utilitarian bulkheads found at buildings of this type, style, and age throughout the historic district. That the enlargement of the bulkhead and the replacement of the HVAC units at the roof will be seen in the context of an existing rooftop billboard and taller buildings in the background. And the removal of the floor plate at the second floor, creating two-story interior space, will not be readily perceptible from the public thoroughfare. However, I found that the number of combined openings at Ninth Avenue facade will remove a substantial amount of historic fabric and change the pattern and load-bearing character of the masonry at the base of the building. And the numerous large openings with butt-jointed glazing will not be in keeping with the configuration of the historic storefront found at buildings of this type and age. Therefore, I recommend working with staff that that at least 2 or 3 of the existing opening bays of openings on Ninth Avenue be retained. I think that's it.
That's it. And that the final rhythm be determined
Work
with
with
the
staff.
staff. All right. Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right. Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland, Commissioner Chapin, Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi. Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 10 in favor, none opposed, the motion passed.
That's approved. Thank you. Please continue to work with the staff. All right, we'll move to the next item.
We're now going to move to our public hearing agenda, starting with item number 1, LPC 24-04645, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn, Block 1982, Lot 59, 66 Downing Street in the Clinton Hill Historic District. This is an Italianate-style row house built circa 1871, and the application is to construct rooftop and rear yard additions.
Okay, Commissioners, the applicant has entered the hearing and will be presenting via Zoom. Tom, I am giving you control of the presentation. Now you just need to click on your screen. And then you can advance the slides using your arrow keys of your mouse. Please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Thank you. My name is Tom Vandenbout. I'm representing NV Design Architecture for this application. Let's see if that works. Yes. So this is a little axon overview of what's being proposed. This is a view overlooking the rear yard. We have a penthouse on the roof and a rear yard extension of 2 stories. None of this, by the way, is visible from the street. Let's see. So this is the house in question. It's mid-block on Downing Street. There is a row. It's the first in a row to the right on the screen of a long row that match, and then there's a slightly different row from going to the left on the screen. Across the street is a large schoolyard and school, and we're on the edge of the district here. This is a view of the current facade, street facade on the left and garden facade on the right. So the plans, we have an unexcavated cellar portion where the proposed addition would be in the rear yard. On the basement floor, there are 2 bedrooms. Our proposal extends the building to align with a proposal that was approved a couple months ago, I believe, maybe 3, for a rear yard extension at 64. So if and when that gets built, our extension would align with that one. So on the parlor floor, we're essentially extending a kitchen with a small terrace to the right that goes down into a private garden. On top of that is a terrace that is adjoining an interior bedroom. And at the very top floor, we have our penthouse with a terrace facing the rear yard. So here's a before and after, or a existing and proposed section. Again, we're limiting the depth of our rear yard extension to align with the unbuilt but approved neighbor to the north. And then we have a penthouse floor that you can see is well outside of the view plane. We're raising the one chimney that we need to. We do not need to raise any of the other chimneys. They're all completely capped. So this is a view of the block. You can see our extension here in the middle that's color-coded as 2 stories. Most of the extensions to the north are relatively modest, but the garden begins to be diminished sort of from our line southward, primarily due to the buildings with large extensions on Grand Avenue that are directly behind us. There was some concern about potential views through the gap here on Gates Avenue, but you can see here that the rear yards are densely populated with trees. There's no real view from that gap, even seasonally. There are so many trees. So these are the views across at those extensions, which are 2 and 3 story, and then north to there's a couple that are deeper, but are lower further to the north. So on the street facade, this is all being handled at staff level, the changes, but we're restoring a cornice and taking off the non-historic gate at the entryway at the top of the stoop. Nonetheless, the elevation here is set back. You can't see any of this, but there are 2 windows, the fireman's access and the facade itself. The rear yard elevation, where you can see the outline of what was approved but is not built, that elevation, we're aligning to that in terms of depth and removing this portion of wall, putting in a big set of window doors, a couple windows at the back. This is all, we're hoping to reclaim the brick that we take out of the existing and build the wall with that reclaimed brick if we can. At the top, this is essentially a simple gray concrete stucco penthouse with 3 doors to keep it as light as possible. That's the same thing, a little bit closer. Expand one window expanded to a door for access to that terrace. And that's it. These are visibility studies. You cannot see any of it. You couldn't see the mock-up from the front. This is showing the extent of our proposed rear yard addition. Oops. Okay.
Okay. And I think in that section, though, you were showing that you still have a more than 30-foot rear yard because you're.
Yeah, we still, the Grand Avenue extension is deeper than would otherwise be allowed now, but we still have we're maintaining over 60 feet of rear yard space, the sum total. So it's still, we're trying to keep it pretty open.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Chapin, followed by
Yeah,
Commissioner Gold.
are there other rooftop additions on this block?
There are not. There's across the garden, there's some higher buildings and there's some assemblies of things on the roof, stair bulkheads, solar panel arrays, that sort of thing. But on this end, on these, you have to go all the way down to the other end to find a stair bulkhead.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
I just have a material question. Under section LPC 07, you call out stucco, new concrete stucco wall. Is this CMU you're using on the walls?
Yes, on the like the cheek walls.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, any other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who would like to speak on this item? Not seeing anyone, I will turn it over to Gregory Kala to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. I do not see any remote participants with their hands raised. If you would like to speak on this item, please click the raise hand button now. Okay. None of the hands are raised, so I will just note for the record that Brooklyn Community Board 2 recommends approval with the suggestion that a cornice be added to the building in line with that on 68 Downing. And we also received a letter recommending approval from the Citizens for Responsible Neighborhood Planning of Clinton Hill and Fort Greene. And I will bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you very much. So I think the testimony was supportive. Is there any final comment you'd like to make before we begin our discussion? I think
No, I'm fine. I just was
Yeah.
unmuting there. Sorry.
And I am just looking at the aerial photo of the block, and I know that there have been some applications where some commissioners have been concerned about approving a rooftop addition where one doesn't historically exist. But I want to remind everybody that the rule would allow, if this were coming in just for a rooftop addition, the rule would allow the staff to approve a rooftop addition, even if none existed in the block. And so, but understanding that sometimes this issue does come up, I do want to just note that I'm looking at the aerial photo, and it does seem like there are a variety of building types and heights, and some, it looks like rooftop accretions, like bulkheads, but also some partial top floors that kind of read as additions. So in any event, I don't think it's as pristine as some other places where we've discussed this. But I don't know, Tom, if you want to add anything to that roofscape analysis.
I think that's right. You can see, especially toward Putnam Avenue, it becomes extremely varied and grows in height. And we did design our proposed penthouse to comply with all of the landmark rules for a staff approval. We just got caught doing the rear yard addition too.
Right. So really the reason the rooftop addition is before us is because it's being proposed in conjunction with a rear yard addition. And so we look at the cumulative effect. Okay. So let's close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing's closed and we'll begin our discussion. This is an application for both the rooftop and rear yard addition. Neither are visible from the public way. And we're reviewing them because the staff is not authorized to approve two at the same time. Well, approve one where there's another approved or requested addition. And so we're looking at the cumulative effect on the building. And I think also the number of two-story additions is smaller than is required for a staff approval. But the applicant has shown us that there are other similarly sized additions. In addition, we've approved a two-story addition on the adjacent building that projects as deeply as they're proposing. And also that the Downing Street side of the block has much deeper rear yards than the other side of the Grand Avenue side of the block, which can also be taken into account. All right, we'll start our discussion. Commissioner Chu, would you like to start this one?
I see this proposal as perfectly appropriate. The cornice is in fact listed on the drawings to be added back, so that is a part of the proposal. I think the rooftop mass is pretty minimal, and considering the other types of heights in the block, I think it's acceptable. And in terms of the addition, these houses on this block have smaller house depths than the Grand Street. The addition will do a lot more for them in terms of adding area that's needed, and they're not even using the full depth of the lot that's allowed. So yes, I think it's appropriate.
Okay, great. Commissioner Master?
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's appropriate.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Totally appropriate.
Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I agree that it's modest and I think it's appropriate in this case.
Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree that it is modest. I am opposed to the rooftop addition.
Okay, understood. Commissioner Ginsburg,
I agree, appropriate.
Commissioner Chen,
Same here.
and Vice Chair Bland. Okay, so I think we have enough to make a motion. Commissioner Chu, would you make that motion?
Regarding LPC 2404645666 Downing Street, Clinton Hill Historic District, an Italianate style row house built circa 1871. Application is to construct a rooftop and rear yard, additions. I note that the building style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of Clinton Hill Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed work will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features, that the proposed rooftop and rear yard additions will not be visible from any public thoroughfare, that the rear yard addition will not rise to the full height of the building, and the rooftop addition will be set back from the front and rear facades, thereby retaining a sense of the building's original scale and massing, that the materials and finishes of the additions featuring brick cladding at the rear and stucco cladding at the rooftop addition will be typical of additions found within the block and elsewhere in the historic district, that the rear addition featuring punched masonry openings with window and door assemblies will feature a level of articulation and ratio of solid to void that are consistent with other rear additions found at buildings of this type within the historic district, that the rear yard addition will not project into the rear yard further than the other rear yard extensions within the block or the approved unbuilt rear addition at the immediate neighbor, and therefore will not diminish the central green space, that the cumulative effect of the added volume of the additions will not overwhelm the building or the surrounding buildings, and that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural or historic character of the building or the Clinton Hill Historic District.
You, Commissioner Master, would you second that motion?
Second.
Mark, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum,
Nope.
Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi. Oh, well, she's recused. Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 8 in favor and 1 opposed, the motion passes.
So that's approved. Thank you. We'll move to the next item.
Next item is public hearing item number 2, LPC 24-08873. An application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn, Block 5115, Lot 1, 1100 Albemarle Road, aka 101 to 113 Stratford Road in the Prospect Park South Historic District. This is a neo-Georgian style house designed by H.R. Ferguson and built in 1909 to 10. The application is to construct porches, alter facades and openings, connect the garage to the house, and place paving at the driveway.
Morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're here today to present to you 1100 Albemarle Road, which is the southwest park, Stratford Road. The Wilsons are here. Summers, Andrew. The Wilsons family home. They're currently living there. So they bought a fixer-upper. We're thinking through what the plans are. Can you hear? Oh, we're having. All right, got it. Can you hear now? All right, so here's the house shown at the corner of Stratford and Albemarle. And the red zone is the original house. You can see the extents of the lot. You can see the district, and I imagine you've seen all kinds of houses in this district over the years. So I'll go on about that. But here's a bit of context, and almost in that center image on the right, almost the house we're looking at, although not quite the same. But the character just goes to the character of the streets and surroundings. This is the house in its current condition. And you can see that it's listing certain pieces of parts are listing a little bit. It is, that porch was rebuilt from the original porch, put up with fewer brackets than the original porch had. It's a neo-Georgian house. It's a little high-waisted at this point because the bricks it's without its porch. The bricks kind of come up quite far on the elevation. But if you look closely, you can see all kinds of things are displaced and canted and need of work. So every surface is in need of some attention. In the 50s, I'll go through this in more detail, but in the 50s, there were a series of additions made. The porch was, one porch pieces was replaced with a brick bump out, and then some openings were made in the wall of the original house, and that's what you see here. All right, the 1940s photograph of the house where the porch was still extant, right? The corner porch that wrapped around Albemarle and Stratford. And then from Stratford on the right, you can see the house past the house in the foreground. And you can see a corner of an addition that we not exactly sure that addition was made of. More images. Stratford Road crossing. Right. Brick additions. So here's a axonometric history of the additions. The original house in the upper left. The second addition somewhere between 1909 and the 50s, which basically is, you can see between the garage and the block of the house, and a two-story addition was made, a kind of sunroom. And then in the 50s, we have our brick blocks added to the house. And our proposed modification in the lower right, which is to trim those brick blocks back and restore the corner porch and add a porch and a solarium toward the lower. And here it is in plan, the same sequence, right? So you can see the additions as they went, and then finally on the right, you see the porches as we're proposing them. And the porches include a 20-inch or 22-inch bump at those, which you'll see in a little bit, so that to widen the rooms a bit, because the rooms in the existing house were a bit narrow, which is Zoom what motivated them putting the bump outs on in the first place. So the existing house on the left, the blue shows the removals, the demolition. The right shows our proposed porch restoration. We set the corner of the porch back a bit to restore the symmetry of the and again, on top, the blue is demolished. On the bottom are proposed modifications, including some work to the garage, which is just a bit of a mess. So again, the same business with a bit more detail and plan. You can see the existing porch on the left is the red at the bottom. The brick boxes show at the left-hand side. This here, and we're basically removing them, doing work to the back edge, and then doing work. Bit of illustration of what we have here now. So what we think happened is that this porch was disassembled and reassembled a bit lower. It has, as it's reassembled, it has one fewer brackets. And of course, all of them were a bit of a mess and things that you can see the intersection of various pieces, the beams, columns of the house, they didn't quite do what they're supposed to. You see the keystones at the top of the windows are seal the porch roof, so this is just a kind of ham-fisted addition. A bit of context in the neighborhood, you know, everything from neo-Georgian to shingle style, but lots of porches. Porches wrapping corners, porches making the identity of the neighborhood. I always love this kind of neighborhood. Sit on the porch and say hello to your neighbors. That's the thing. All right, so again, more detail. You see these are the projections into the porch zone that we are proposing, a bit more space for these rooms. You see the dining room has a bit of a bay, which helps it a bit. This is the, you know, quite, about 13 feet. Details, which I'm sure you'll want to see, but the basic construction of the porch roof in the traditional manner, using the components, using historic components that match as closely as possible. You can see in our photos. The projection at the living room, containing alcohol fireplace, is similar, and the solarium windows at the kitchen, which are double glazed and top of fixed light. So here you can start to see the condition of things. The brick, well, the lintels are rusted, the brick's displaced. This is all on its last legs. The water drainage system for the house, of course, cut off, pouring around foundations. It's already been hard at work to restore that. This is, we talked a little bit about the business of the bump out and the solarium and so forth. It is something that we see commonly throughout the neighborhood, a variety of kind of modifications. We plan to restore the driveway and two concrete block pavers leading to a grass block central area. Driveway as it is, right, various driveways, historic examples on the left, tracks. And existing driveways, I think you all know about driveways. And our plan to use grass blocks in combination with these blocks, so it becomes usable for a variety of things. And the elevation, this is the south elevation of the house. And this is one of the 1950s additions. We're going to keep some of the framing, but we'll take the extension away. We'll do a bit of work on the windows. And what we show is wrapping the porch partway back. The garage starts about here. And we would make a glass, wire glass connector, what's called, between the garage inside the house here. Place a door here. So we can basically come out of the house, undercover, and into the garage under the glass. So here's an example of what the kind of thing that would be. It just goes basically edge to edge, upseal. And some more of the drawings here showing the detail of the house, the lime brick mortar, beautiful original brickwork. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions? Commissioner Chen?
Just want to commend the applicant. You know, the expression, a house is never finished, but you have really come full cycle. This really makes a lot, excellent presentation, clear, logical choices. And I think this is a vast improvement over what you have right now.
We don't often see people giving up added later floor area to restore and open up porches and in one case, create a new porch. So that's a treat for us. Any other questions? Yes, Commissioner Chu.
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that you brought Stratford back as a front facade with your really wonderful. My question is specifically about finish underneath the porch. Some of it is restored stonework and some of it is plaster on CMU. Where is what?
So,
And how visible is that?
well, there's a lot of perimeter plants.
Right.
So most of it's for
Shrubbery.
shrubbery. And there's interesting planting scheme that Albert's landscape architect came up with that district. It was funny when he had 2 layers of trees, right? He had maples and he had poplars that came in at different areas. It was really a lot of attention to that. But the existing, where the existing corner porch was, is stone bearing walls.
Okay.
On one side is more or less historic, needs to be built. On the other side, it's in good shape. Around the back, where the 50s addition came down, it's concrete masonry stucco. And we'll take that down to the top and we'll restuff it.
Oh, and the new kitchen addition porch piece at the rear, not really a rear, it is the front, but that is of the traditional aesthetic, as I can see, restrain your modernism back to the little bridge element back there, right? That's the only piece that's there.
Well, that little bridge element, there's not too much to it.
Yeah, right. Okay. Right.
But yes, the traditional elements.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
All right, other questions? All right, let's move to public testimony and we may have questions after that. And I'll note that there is no one in the hearing room at this time, so I'll turn it to Gregory to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have one participant with their hands raised, that being Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society of New York. Christina Conroy, I am promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society. I need to say that the speaker was quite a distance away from the microphone, and I heard almost nothing of his presentation. So if you've already answered some of these questions, apologies in advance. So good morning. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, and founded in New York City in 1966, the Victorian Society in America is dedicated to fostering the appreciation and preservation of our 19th and early 20th century heritage. The New York chapter promotes preservation of our historic districts, individual and scenic landmarks, interiors, and civic art. Now, the Victorian Society is happy to support the proposed alterations at 1100 Albemarle. Removing portions of the brick-clad additions added to the south facade in the 1950s will not destroy any significant historical material. These demolitions will also allow for reconstruction of the original wraparound porch at the southwest corner, noted in the designation report, bringing the street facade closer to its original appearance. The proposed construction of the new porch at the southeast corner of the building rear will help unify the various additions to this facade. Now, we wouldn't usually support creating the wide window openings the applicant is proposing for the south facade in a house built in 1905. However, the way they've been detailed with small panes, multi-light French doors, and transoms will recall the historic detailing in this and other houses of the period. Also, their locations, partially hidden by the new porches and perpendicular to the street, will minimize their impact. But we do have problems with this proposal. There are very few notes giving materials, details, or dimensions for the new materials. There are no dimensions given on the one window detail drawing, and while it's drawn as if it were wood, it doesn't actually say if it's wood, aluminum clad wood, or metal. We couldn't find any notes calling out the materials or dimension of finish of the new porch columns. The new porch railings are also drawn as if they're wood, but then again, no notes. And we don't know where the design came from. the phrase, quote, original window to be replaced, unquote, is on several drawings, but replaced with what? All details, dimensions, materials, and finishes must be documented and appropriate to this historic house before the permits are issued. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised, so I will note for the record that Brooklyn Community Board 14 recommends approval. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
All right, thank you. So we have very supportive testimony, but some questions on the materials and finishes. And if you can speak to that, that would be great. So the windows and the porch specifically.
So we're in the process of exploring the windows right now. And we're going to try to keep the original sash and restore the pockets. It looks like in the 50s, some kind of retrofit dado aluminum piece was set into the original windows, but we think some of the panes were replaced, some were not. But what we're going to try to do is open the pockets back up and return them to their original operation where we have that ability. In some cases, windows have been replaced with vinyl windows, and those we need to have new sashes made or replaced. In the case of the solarium on the right-hand side of the upper drawing, those are Marvin wood replacement window, or not replacement, but new windows. Those are store-bought items of a custom size, carefully detailed to bring them into the context of the house. The components of the porch will be wood components. Where they'll be sourced from, we're not entirely sure. Most of those components are available as manufactured items. And to keep the costs within reason, we are planning on using manufactured items to the greatest extent possible. And you probably know there's a 10-time differential between different column manufacturers and according to where they come from and what they're made out of. So, but we'll be working with staff to go through that.
The vinyl windows to be replaced, would those also be replaced with the Marvin wood windows? Or?
The problem with, I know you go through this all the time, the problem with Marvin replacement windows is that the jambs are so thick that if they're placed into the original window openings, we have to demolish the entire window casing, destroy the interior and the exterior of the house. So we don't want to do that. What we'll probably do is have new casings made and slipped into the existing pieces, as long as they're usable. And we have a window restoration person about to show up and start that process.
All right, thank you very much. Any other final questions, commissioners? Okay, so let's move to our discussion. Commissioner Master, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing is closed and we'll begin our discussion. And as we've seen, this is a proposal to open up a previously filled in portion of the porch to restore that porch, and then to also remove a later modern addition and create a new porch at the back. And that includes restoration and replacement of associated windows, porches, and other decorative elements on the porch. So we'll begin our, and then the connector between the garage and the house and the paving. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. This is a great project. I think there's not a thing about it that I think is problematic. I think that the applicants are in good hands with a careful architect who's thinking about it from a preservation perspective. I think that the proposed areas of modification and new interventions are completely in sync with and subsidiary to and appropriate for the house as it was originally designed. I think it's overall a great job. I think that they do, of course, want to work with staff, not only on the materials of the porch, but on the upper levels of the house, roof, cornices, etc., that haven't really been talked about. But given the care with which they've described their work to date, I am confident that that will be done and done very well. And it's great for the district to have this house back,
Okay.
back in shape.
It is great, in a great district too. Commissioner Ginsburg?
I can't agree more. It's a excellent job and totally appropriate.
Commissioner Chen?
Me three.
Okay. Vice Chair Bland?
I want to riff just for a second on this extraordinary, wonderful historic district. Not only does it have some of the most extraordinary houses ever built in the city of New York, but the layout of the subdivision as it was understood when it was laid out in the early 19th century became a model for many subdivisions around the country, not just here in the city. The relationship of the street to the curb, to the planting strip, to the trees, to the sidewalk, it was all incredibly carefully laid out and in a different way than had been seen before. So the district itself is extraordinary. And then the houses, the variety of retro houses is amazing. So I advise you all to go visit. And shamelessly, I'll say you should stop at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden on the way and see the 50,000 bluebells, which are in bloom right now. Now, to the matter, extraordinary and such a wonderful thing to undertake, such a tour de force of a restoration. I think it's brilliantly done. Not a thing what I disagree with. I think the presentation was verbally excellent, but visually enticing as well. So hear, hear.
Thank you. Commissioner Lutfi?
Thank you, Fred, and everyone who came before me. But for this, thanks, Fred, for all of this detail. I mean, having grown up in New York and in Brooklyn, I've seen this really, as you said, extraordinary neighborhood go through quite a transformation, not positive. And now it is making, there are moves to bring it back to its, original gorgeousness. And it is kind of amazing that this neighborhood exists in New York. You would think it wouldn't be here. So so thank you. And as we always say, it's when you put love and detail in a project, it shows, and this is going to be great. So I can approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Chu?
Yeah, totally agreed. And I commend the architect and applicant for the vision of bringing this house back, as opposed to just trying to build more bulk and really making not only the house, but the district more beautiful with this project. Kudos.
Commissioner Masson?
Yeah, I agree with all the other comments. The end product that we have here is absolutely gorgeous with the additional porch. So congratulations to the applicant and the architect in producing such a fine proposal.
Thank you, Commissioner Jefferson.
A wonderful restoration. I particularly, that was transition from the house to the garage. But then a piece of glass was a delight.
Thank you. Commissioner Chapin?
Yeah, I agree with everyone. Very familiar with this neighborhood. A friend of mine who still live on the street. And anyway, I think it's great. And the porch restoration in particular and the enlargement really gives a sense of the original and more transparency. And so I can approve it. It's great.
Thanks. Okay, so I think we're all in agreement. So Commissioner Goldblum, would you make the motion?
Regarding 1100 Albemarle Road, also known as 101 to 103 Stratford Road in the Prospect Park South Historic District, the application is to construct porches, alter facades and openings, connect the garage to the house, and replace paving at the driveway. I note the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Prospect Park South Historic District. I recommend approval. Finding that the removal of portions of the one-story brick addition constructed in the mid-20th century will eliminate unsympathetic alterations that detract from the special architectural character of the house. That the extension of the front porch and creation of a new porch featuring white painted wood columns and bracketed cornice will be consistent with the restored historic porches at the building and will be better integrated with the remaining 20th century addition and with the body of the house. That the installation of new wood, single and multi-light windows and doors will be consistent with the historic fenestration. In terms of materials, details, and finish, that the proposed projecting bays with large groupings of multi-light windows and doors at the Stratford Road facade will be partially obscured by the porches and will be consistent with the scale of larger window and door assemblies found in houses throughout the historic district. That the proposed one-story garage connector will feature wood railings and a simple roof to harmonize with, that was too far. Harmonize with, there we go. The details and materials of the house will be mostly hidden by the porch, thereby maintaining the appearance of the garage as an independent secondary structure on the lot. That the proposed enlarged driveway featuring concrete with intermittent strips of grass and permeable turf block pavers adjacent to the garage will not diminish the sense of greenery around the house, and that the proposed work will enhance the special architectural and historic character of the building in the Prospect Park South Historic District.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second.
Park?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Commissioner Bland, Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen,
Aye.
Commissioner Chu,
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg,
Aye.
Commissioner Goldblum, Commissioner Jefferson,
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi,
Aye.
Commissioner Master.
Aye.
With 10 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
All right, that's approved. Thank you very much and good luck. And we'll move to the next item.
Next item is public hearing item number 3, LPC 24-08399, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 231, Lot 1, 301 Canal, 419 to 421 Broadway and 423 Broadway, all in the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. A taxpayer built in 1955, a restaurant and shop, and a modified federal-style store and dwelling built in 1822 to 23. The application is to demolish 2 of the buildings and construct a new building at the corner, and to construct an addition, install the storefront and signage, and modify the fire escape at 423 Broadway.
Hi, good morning. Albert LeBose, principal of United American Land. We have this site. We bought it pre-COVID, and we designed this beautiful building, a Mars design. And since it was pre-COVID, it's unfortunately we designed an office building, right? And I don't have to tell you where the office market is and where the financing for the office market is. So I'm kind of embarrassed coming back here and say, hey, we have to change gears and we can't build this building. And we have a very big interest in Canal Street on a couple of the corners and other properties. And this particular site now it's been blighted for a while. So we thought, let's go ahead and build something as a placeholder, like a one-story, beautiful, gorgeous retail building that we can all be proud of, and come back and fight another day when the market comes back and we figure it out somehow. With the rezoning, people ask me, why don't you do resi? But, given that the site is pretty small and constrained, interest rates are where they are, doesn't really, and soil conditions and all that, economically feasible, doesn't really, for us, at this moment, doesn't make sense to do a resi building. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Erin. And thanks.
Morning, Commissioners. Erin Ruley, Higgins Quays, Barth and Partners. So what we're looking at today is 419 Broadway. It's actually a collection of 4 buildings that are an assemblage. It includes 301 Canal Street, this two-story orange building here, orange brick. The one-story commercial structure on the corner, which was originally two buildings, 419 and 421 Broadway, and then 423 Broadway, which is a three-story late federal period building that was converted, added onto in the 1860s. And so they all occupy the northwest corner of Canal and Broadway in the Soho Cast Iron District. As Albert introduced, this was the approved project in 2017, commercial, 8-story commercial building. It was a special permit project because that was prior to the Soho rezoning. And it was a 74 7-Eleven. It included the restoration of 423 Broadway, which we see right there. That project was not realized. The permits expired in December of last year. And so what we have today is a proposal that essentially reclads the existing lower structures, the 419 and 421 buildings and 301 Canal. Those were buildings that were approved for demolition under the prior application. And the design is inspired by the cast iron bases that we see throughout the district. And it's a very typical Morris Ajmi play on the historic features, fluted columns, projecting storefronts, and decorative patterning. 423 is also part of the project, remains part of the project. So that'll be restored largely in the way that we had proposed under the 74 7-Eleven. New commercial storefront. It'll have a continuous commercial space with the 419 building. The upper two floors will be converted for residential. There's a rear extension that you can see here, 2 stories. And that will be preserving the pitched side wall of 423, and the addition is set back slightly so it slides behind the plane of the brick that you see here. And so all of these parts sort of work together in the corner assemblage that we see here, and the overall project really reflects the complexity of the site and its history. I think we would all agree that we'd like to see something taller in the future on this site, but the object here is to have a viable use and revitalize the corridor, which it's in desperate need of. Of course, Landmarks wouldn't be approving a temporary building, so we have worked really hard to design a small-scale commercial building that has real integrity and can hold the corner and allow for a placemaking that is absent today. So just quickly, again, the 4 buildings that comprise the site: 301 Canal Street. It's a 2-story commercial building dating largely from the 1960s. We'll talk a bit more about the history there. 419 Broadway along Canal Street. You can see it has 2 subway entrances tight up against the facade. And then along Broadway, 419 is the corner section and 421 is this section behind the sidewalk bridge. And then, of course, 423 Broadway here. The buildings started out as 4-story Italianate structures in the mid-19th century. You can see this is 419, this is 421, and this is 423. In this corner view, we have that same perspective, but then also includes the original 301 Canal, which was a 2-story mid-19th century building at that time. By the late 19th century, 419 and 421 had been combined on the interior, and so we see that in the map from 1899. It shows it as a single footprint. In the 1950s, 1953 to be exact, the upper 3 floors of the 419 and 421 buildings were demolished, and it was left with a converted base that gave us the condition that we have today. So storefronts all along Broadway and Canal, and then the span, what had been the spandrel became the parapet, and clad over in a series of metal and contemporary finishes at both of the buildings. In the background, you can see 301 Canal. In 1966, that building was entirely refaced, and all of the interiors really date to that period as well for that building. And then, of course, this is the designation photo. So in the early 70s, the district is designated, and this is the condition we have had since then. In 2017, the commission approved demolition of the 419 building and 301. These are current photos, but also probe photos that we included in the 2017 package, and to explain the conditions of the buildings. And the commission found at that time that the buildings did not bear any resemblance to the historic buildings that were originally there, and that there was no significant historic fabric remaining at the buildings. So just to go through one by one, 301 Canal, again, originally a mid-19th century building, altered in 1966. This is an entirely new facade. Here we're looking between 419 and 301 Canal. So this is steel from 419, and then we're looking into the lot line essentially. Interior construction, there's all modern structure and finishes in 301. There are small areas of early brick that remain on the lot lines. They're unexposed, but for all intents and purposes, it's a 1960s building. 419 Canal, we can see the one-story structure along Canal here, and then on Broadway below it. This is a one-story commercial building with large openings that have roll-down gates. There's no storefront infill. There's sort of open bays that were used as vending stalls. And here we have largely contemporary structure that has been integrated, probably resulting from the introduction of the subway and changes over time. But there are steel beams, steel columns. There's columns encased in concrete. We have some fragments of early brick and brownstone, which we can see in this probe up here. But of course, that's all sort of sandwiched between later alterations and later materials in that location. At 421, the conditions are largely the same. Some fragments of early brick that are embedded within later alterations. We can see that on the sort of bottom left or in that probe. And areas of brownstone that fragments of brownstone that remain. There are two cast iron columns that are within the opening of that bay, and these would have been interior columns within a projecting storefront. And so largely the same condition that we see at 419. And so as you can see, it's what remains is compromised and fragmentary at best. And all of this was the same content that we presented in 2017 as part of the original proposal. And so just stepping back to the site to consider how to think about developing a new one-story building. It has been so long occupied by a one-story building, and how it might engage in the conversation that currently goes on. And so we looked at the corners throughout the district and how they evolved. These are sort of windows into the layers of history in the district, often due to infrastructure changes. We see it in the major arteries along Canal and Houston Street, Lafayette, where subway stations caused demolition, street widenings, usually traffic-related alterations that then gave way to either construction of small-scale commercial buildings like we see on the top left, earlier generations of buildings that are then sort of sandwiched between the later generation and new development on the bottom left, and or garage construction primarily. There's very many garages throughout the district. And then, but also across the street. So this is 277 Canal directly across the street from our site on the bottom right, that we looked at fairly recently with you all. And that the building that had been there previously was demolished during subway construction because they didn't want to shore it up. And so we see this first generation in the photo of small scale commercial buildings that then eventually gets replaced by small scale commercial, but a little bit bigger than what was there right after the demolition. But what happened at 419 was somewhat different in that the buildings were destabilized during the construction, just what they didn't want to deal with at 277. They left the buildings there at 419 and then eventually had to demolish the upper sections of the building. So just looking at those layers and trying to understand how to pull together this complex reading or assembly of the parts in this corner. And then, of course, looking at other commission-approved small-scale buildings, 1 and 2 story structures. We see a variety of materials and locations, corners, mid-blocks. But most importantly is the scale and relationship that we see to these buildings to the Soho streetscape. And I think interestingly, 92 Prince, this was originally an approval for a much larger scale building, and only the base ended up being developed. So it almost foretells our story a little bit today. And so I think with that, Morris is going to come walk you through the design.
Morning, Chair Carroll, Commissioners and staff. I'm Morris Adry from Morris Adry Architects. We would love to see a taller building here, but I think all the research that Erin and Sarah did and my team helped us to come up with a design, which I think is a good placeholder for the future. And it's not too big, you know, but I do have a model which will pass it. As Erin mentioned, we looked at some 1-story or 2-story taxpayer buildings throughout the district, but we actually went back and we looked at the cast iron architecture specifically and the bases of buildings. So we've sort of grayed out the above levels of these street views just to focus our attention to the base of the building. And we started to look at things that we knew, but which helped us to really approach this building. These are drawing from Badger's catalog and also a photograph of the key elements of cast iron architecture: post and beam, entablature, here fluted columns, and then the base or bulkhead in cast iron as well. And that became sort of the inspiration for how we approached the project. We did some studies of other buildings, just the base spacing, and also the one in the center is our project that has about 18, a little over 8, about 18, exactly 18'8" base spacing on Canal, and 17 and change on Broadway. Also at 455 at the bottom, I'll show you another image of that, which had projecting storefronts originally, which is similar to what we're doing, but those were heavily modified. And then here's some images. So the model is circulating. We looked at this as just a series of bays that had columns and a beam or entablature, and rather than replicating existing cast iron architecture, we looked at the architecture as a way to inspire us. No? Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. Yeah. We'll put it back together. But I think it really helps to see the depth of the facade and the articulation, and also the components, which is something that we felt was important. Even though this is a small building, we put a lot of care into how all the pieces went together. And we think that it addresses the appropriateness issue by that attention, or through that attention. And then this is the example I talked about. On the top, you can see the projecting storefronts, which are similar to what we're doing in each bay, and the modified version below, which is just a big, simple facade in line. And then here's the column concept. We looked at catalogs, images, and architecture in place, and came up with a modified fluted column, which has a folded section. All of the metal in the building we're proposing to be cast aluminum with a paint finish, which would replicate the sand finish that you would see in cast iron. And we've used that on other projects before. And then that woven or folded entablature references the patterns that you see through the district, but in a way that references a new language that we're using on the column, but also one that refers to the historic architecture, but doesn't mimic it. And you see that in the folded pattern on the lower right. There's the band at the top, and then we're showing the signage sitting on a ledge with a textured panel behind it. Here are all the pieces in the typical bag. Calling out the cast aluminum and all of the dimensions. And you see the depth of the column recessed into the facade with the projecting bays on each side. You can see that in the center drawing as well as on the lower right. You know, one of the things that we really wrestled with is that we first looked at this as a 3-story building and then a 2-story building, and just all of the vertical circulation that was required was really knocking out a lot of the usable floor area. So we landed at 1 story. We're trying to find the appropriate height. The building north of 423, or sorry, yes, 423, and the building west of 301 look like they're 2 different scales when you look at the image. So really finding the right height for the base, which is essentially the same height as 301 now, which you see on the left there in this drawing. It's just a couple of inches taller than that now. And that's the proposed design. Karen's going to give us a little more information about the 423, right? Right?
Thank you. So just to point out the condition here, this is the proposed plan. 423 is, it fully occupies the lot, so you can see it goes all the way back to the rear lot line. It's the part of the proposal is to remove the party wall between the 2 buildings so that we can have continuous retail space at the ground floor. And then this will be the new residential entry at the north end of the building. Moving to 423, the building is in rather poor condition. The scope of restorative work is largely the same as it was under the 74-711 approval. And so just an overview of the general conditions. We have a painted and coated facade. We have the late federal lintels. They're brownstone and they've been painted, and at least one has been parged. The galvanized cornice, this is circa 1860, when the building was Italianated. And then many of the sills are covered with aluminum panning. At some point in its history, all of the structure was removed at the storefront, and it caused this stepped cracking that you can see here. So everything in the storefront at the base of the building has been removed. There's no historic fabric whatsoever, no piers or anything, and it's been all clad over. There's modern structure with this aluminum cladding system. We also have a historic fire escape that the baskets will be retained, but the ladder removed because it will no longer be needed for egress. Looking at the back of the building, so as I pointed out, the ground floor goes all the way back to the lot line. This is the view on the interior. So this center view is where we're standing on the roof of that 1-story section. And so you see it goes all the way back. This is 305 Canal that we're looking at there, looking west. On the left is the amount of exposed historic fabric on the rear of the building. So we have what is less than a full story of common brick. It all has been all of the openings have been coated in a asphaltic material. The roof is a non-historic asphaltic membrane roof, and the dormers have been coated with a similar material. The coping along the parapet here was originally brownstone. It's very deteriorated, and it's also been coated with asphalt. So that'll be replaced as part of the overall restorative scope. And then this just gives you a sense of the extent of what remains at the rear wall, the amount of coating that comes up off of the roof level, waterproofing and around the openings. So the proposal fully restores the building, includes new historicizing storefront, a combination of wood and metal. We'll look at the details. Where necessary, sills and lintels will be replicated in cast stone to match brownstone. All of the facade will be stripped, brick repair, repointing, standard scope of work. And here you can see the baskets of the fire escape will be retained and the ladders removed. Details of the storefront, a new cornice, it's going to have a nice projection on it, carefully detailed, and CTS are the architects for the preservation work. A new 2-foot tall sign, this is internally illuminated along the frieze. The retail entry will be the left on the south bay, and then a new storefront display window, and then the residential entry to the north. The storefront itself, will be the pilasters and piers and bulkhead will all be wood, but the windows and doors will be aluminum in that system. And we can see it in the plan here. So this is the commercial entry that can take you into all of the commercial space, and then the residential entry that will take you upstairs. Here are just to give you a sense of the details of it. The projection of the cornice, so it's going to have some real depth and texture to it. That illuminated signage that's directly below that, attached at the frieze, and then at the bulkhead. The bulkhead is 20 inches high, wood recessed panel detail with sitting on a stone base. And then in plan, we can see the 419, the new column for 419, the pier of 423. So this will be the extent of the masonry wall that's retained, the new paneled pier at the end, wood paneled, and then pilasters with that same panel detail in the storefront. The side elevation is also, this is that exposed side that we see the addition coming at the rear, off the rear. It's in very poor condition. It's going to be assessed. The main goal here is to stabilize the wall prior to any work starting. So it'll be inspected by an engineer, and everything will be stripped, brick repairs done and repointed as part of that stabilization. The coping stone will be replaced with new brownstone to match, new cast stone to match brownstone. And based on the conditions, we think that these upper few courses of the parapet are going to need to be reconstructed just based on the level of deterioration. And then there are two chimneys that are up against the wall at 425 Broadway, and those will be removed as part of the project. And I think, so Morris will take us through.
Thanks, Sarah. We're extending 423 in the back 20 feet, which you can see here. This with a standing seam aluminum material on the side, and we see in this section you can see the extent of the extension as well as the outline of the existing building with red dashed lines. There'll be 2 apartments, 1 per floor, and as Aaron mentioned, there's retail that's contiguous with the new building on the corner. Here are the elevations of the existing on the left of the rear facade and the proposed on the right. I think I want to show you. We are proposing to have solar panels on the roof here, and this is a proposed layout which will be worked through in the latter phases of the design. And then 2 other issues that we're working through, and we've appealed to FDNY, one of the captains at FDNY, to eliminate the handrails both on the roof of 423 as well as on the corner building. So hopefully those are 2 separate requests. So one may come through or both. Hopefully that'll happen. And here are some visibility studies just to show the equipment and the rooftop for both buildings. The handrails set back from the facade, but we're also trying to. We looked at just raising the parapet, but it just got to be too heavy. That's it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, questions? Commissioner Chu.
So the lot line brick wall between, I guess, the brick building and the corner, is that being removed to join the ground floor all the way across?
Yes. When we get the plan up.
Yeah, that might help.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.
Oh, wait, sorry, 1 2 minutes.
All right. So
that's here.
and so that it is is it one large retail space?
I think the idea is that it can function as one or
large.
potentially as two, but I think they want the flexibility. Yes.
Oh, so the signage could be the same name on that storefront as the corner building.
Yes.
So the spaces are linked, but you obviously decided to pop up the height of the corner building. Could you just talk about your thoughts behind that?
We went around in circles.
Yeah, I know that the height was something you mentioned, was something that you worked on. I just wanted to hear your
Yeah,
say.
no, I'll get to the render, sorry. There. It was a balancing act between a building that felt too low, if it aligned, and then we felt that and I mentioned earlier, if you look at 423 here, and this is 305, 303. They look like they're two different scales. The floor to floor heights are very tall at 423. And so we were trying to find a balance between those heights, and this is this is where we ended up.
And it actually, I think, is sort of at the height of where 301 Canal is now, right?
Exactly. It's 2 inches tall.
All right, other questions? Commissioner Jefferson.
So you're building at the corner, really well done and composed. From this view, it seems to me that the existing building, you made it into two facades, right? The gray one and the red one. And it's kind of a collage, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, conceptually, why not just make it all gray to be a backdrop for your beautiful building? Why the issue of making it two facades in the back that you can see from this view?
I think it's a great question. I think maybe the answer might be that we could paint the brick. We wanted to have a record of the party wall there, or the side wall of the building. But I think that we did that by changing the material. But I think if we were to paint the brick and it would then be similar color to the metal, you would still see the metal, which is recessed behind the brick, and a different material and texture, but would function more as a backdrop. So I think that would be a good solution. We didn't want to replace all that material, but or do it in brick.
No, I understand. It's
Yeah.
cover it up.
Right.
Cover it up with the material.
Yeah.
But I'm questioning the composition.
Right. No, and I think by making it all the same color, that would achieve the goal of making it more of a backdrop and also reflecting the existing condition and the new proposed design.
Other questions? All right, I don't see any other questions right now, so we'll move to public testimony. Is there anyone in the room who'd like to speak on this item? All right, not seeing anyone in the room to speak, I'll turn it over to Gregory Kalla to see if we have any remote participants.
Thank you, Chair Carroll. We have a couple of remote participants with their hands raised. The first we'll be hearing from is Christina Conroy from the Victorian Society of New York. Christina Conroy, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Christina Conroy for the Victorian Society, New York. The Victorian Society is happy to support the proposed work at 423 Broadway. The planned restoration will bring this important early 19th century building significantly closer to its original appearance, especially as seen from Canal Street. While the rear yard addition will be visible above the new building, it does not appear to be obtrusive in this context. We also support the demolition of 301 Canal and 419 and 421 Broadway. We support, in theory, the construction of an obviously 21st century building if that building is designed in a manner which supports the specific character of the adjacent buildings, the streetscape, and the district. In many ways, we feel that the proposed building does. However, we have two concerns. First is that the architects have made no provision for reusing the two remaining cast iron columns, which they've carefully documented on Board 10. These are smart architects. This is the Soho Cast Iron Historic District. It's not unreasonable to require them to incorporate these historic elements into their exterior design. We were surprised that this wasn't part of the proposal after seeing it in the presentation and the photo of the dismantled, stolen, and lost historic cast iron Bogardus building. The second is the overall scale of the new building. If you look at the elevations of the building approved in 2017, Board 3, you'll see that the combined height of the ground floor display windows and sign bands on that building were shorter than the display windows alone at 423. The new building deferred to the historic buildings. The display windows in the 2024 design have grown approximately 3 feet taller. We believe this change in height and scale will allow the new building to dominate this corner in a way which is inappropriate. In fact, many elements on this building seem overscaled, including the show windows, sign bands and signs, and entablature. Therefore, we urge the commissioners to require that the design be modified to replicate the proportions of the ground floor approved in 2017. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next up, we will be hearing from Lucy Levine from the Historic Districts Council. Lucy Levine, I'm promoting you to panelist right now. Please unmute your line and state your name for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Lucy Levine. I'm speaking on behalf of the Historic Districts Council. It is fascinating to see this proposal for a contemporary taxpayer. HDC is interested to know what happened to the previous approved scheme. The current proposal presents an odd challenge because it's both too small and too large for this site. To clarify, HDC believes this site can take a much larger building than what is being proposed here, but what is being proposed here is oversized for the single-story taxpayer form. We assume that the current proposal will serve as a base for the developer's larger construction project at this site. Whether this proposal is meant as a base for a future project or as a standalone one-story structure, HDC believes these commercial storefronts should align with those on neighboring buildings as they do in the previous scheme. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. I do not see any further hands raised on the attendees list, so I will note for the record that Manhattan Community Board 2 recommends approval of the demolition of the corner buildings at Canal Street and Broadway, approval of the restoration and enlargement of the intact North Broadway building, the renovation of the West Canal Street building, and the one-story corner building incorporating the area of several derelict demolished buildings, and denial of the bulkheads, and recommends that they be higher to conform more closely to those of the district as presented in the examples of neighborhood context, and denial of the aggressive signage in each bay as presented, and recommends that the lettering be no more than half the size of those presented using pin-mounted halo-lit individual letters as is the accepted style for modern lettering in the district, and that the number of signs be reduced depending on the number of retail tenants. And with that, I'll bring it back to you, Chair Carroll.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask if you'd like to respond to the comments.
Thank you. So I just want to go back to a couple of these slides. First, I think just to address the Victorian Society's question about the columns. Those columns were, of course, part of the approval to demolish in 2017. They are very small columns, and they were originally interior columns. These would have all had projecting storefronts with the column within the storefront bay. So it has not been incorporated into the design. I think going back in terms of the questions of scale that were raised by both BSNY and HDC, it's a challenging site. We have, as you can see here, the two large subway entries along Canal, and then this is the current height of 419, and we're matching the height of 301, and you need some amount of presence on this corner. It's a very busy corner, and I think the model is really helpful because it gives you a sense of scale that I think that the rendering perhaps doesn't, and that it all feels a bit more consistent, whereas in the renderings, it takes on maybe a life of its own. But again, this idea that we have to try to sort of rise above the level of the existing subway entries and then have a properly proportioned building. I think the scale is one of the inherent traits of characteristics of Morris's work. He takes those elements and then plays with the scale, and I think that this in some way represents all of those things coming together. And just touching on that idea of collage, again, that idea of preserving this historic wall and having the addition slide behind it, but all of these things reading as a part, going back to those historic photographs where you're looking into the block and you're understanding seeing the sidewalls revealed against and the adjacent construction, there's a complexity to it that I think we're trying to capture in the overall design for the site. And just a note about the community board, we did hear the conversation about the bulkheads. We increased the height by 6 inches. We also increased the height because it became somewhat of a proportional issue, increased the height of the panel that the transom panel that the signage sits within. We did not increase the height of the signage. And so that would balance out a little bit better. It's Canal Street. That's the signage proposal is very much in the context of Canal Street. It's eternally illuminated. It's 2 feet in height. Staff allows for 18 inches, but this is eternally illuminated, as is the signage on 423. But we think that if a site could sustain it, it is this site and in a contemporary new expression.
And Aaron, right across the street at 277 Canal, I believe we also approved internally illuminated signs, so they'll be seen in context of each other.
Right, and those signs were approved at 3 feet. Yeah.
Okay. So these are shorter than the signs we
These are
approved
smaller than
on the other one.
And there we have a master plan that allows for a lot of variation in the signage. We're imagining this to be, this is envisioned as a single occupant here, but giving allowances for if it's a logo versus an actual name sign, and but again, picking up on some of that variation within the bays.
Right. And then just finally, with respect to the testimony about the scale, there were a lot of comments about just keeping the height of the base of the taller building, which of course this is a separate independent building, doesn't necessarily or shouldn't necessarily read as the base of something else, but it was also not intended to be the base of something taller in the future. Maybe you can speak to that and why it's important this be a fully composed building on its own.
Sure. I think thank you for raising, that's a really important point. The original approval was a much taller building. It can sustain, it could have a lower storefront and not need to derive all of its character from a single story expression. That changes when you have a single story building. It needs to have more presence than what would have been the base. This building is not going to be the base for something taller. Part of the economics of the project is to be able to do something with the existing structure. And in order for this to be a base of something to come, we would have to build in the structure for the new building, and no one would knows what that would be. So this is very much a building unto itself. It has been designed that way. It has integrity to recognize the importance of this corner. We felt that having added height was important in order to continue the street wall a bit, anchor the corner, and create that composition that's sort of a jumble right now.
All right, thank you. Any other final questions?
I-
Yes, Commissioner Chu and then Commissioner Chen.
You were just talking about the structure. Thank you for clarifying that. Does the plan actually have a column layout? I did not notice that. There's just something on the party wall.
Yeah, if you go to the floor plan, the new structure along the shore.
That's what I wanted to see.
North Oklahoma, yeah, right. Funds.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay.
You can see the three floating columns along where the 4.3 wall.
Right. Okay, so they just span over the lot. It's a span, a truss, right? And those columns are sitting on existing foundation walls.
Right.
Correct.
Those columns.
Perimeter. Okay,
That carry the new perimeter columns will carry the storefront itself.
and the roof on the
And the
edge.
roof.
Right, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, it just, obviously, I'm glad that there's improvement being made. And I think one of the observation I have for this site is that one of the problem of the modern society is that we're plagued with graffiti. And that relates to the scale here, right? Because the visibility, that the higher, the taller, yeah, as long as you can maintain that new band of the panel or the thing, that it blocks the remaining graffiti that's on the back wall, which is very unfortunate. So that for when the commissioners comment later on about whether that brick should be painted or covered, that's something for us to consider, because, you know, if it's a painted surface, as Noble White used to say, that's going to be an issue. So I just want to bring it to the board's attention.
Okay, thank you. Any other final questions or thoughts? All right, let's close the hearing and begin our discussion. Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion to close the hearing?
I'm sorry.
Close the hearing?
Yeah.
So
I-
moved. Okay,
yes.
Commissioner Goldblum, would you
Makes the
second
motion.
that motion?
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the hearing is closed and we've had a really thorough presentation and discussion about the scheme or the plan today to construct a new one-story building that connects to 423 Broadway, and an expansion of that building, and then the storefronts, the restoration and the signage, and the composition of all of the parts of the assemblage. And I do note that the commission has in the past had a long history of approving one-story plus mezzanine sized buildings, because in the past the zoning didn't allow retail at the ground floor. And so with a taller building, so that we had to approve something that was only sort of 1 or 1.5 stories tall. So there is a history of those, as well as, of course, the historic taxpayers that we see dotted throughout the district. And so we'll have a discussion on this as the applicants presented a standalone building. Will not serve as the base of something taller. Should something else be proposed in the future that's taller, that would come back to us as a new proposal. So with that groundwork, Vice Chair Bland, would you like to start this one?
Yeah, I think it's critical, this difference between a one-story building versus the base of a taller building. And I think Aaron stated it, Morris stated it, that a one-story building needs more heft to express itself than simply the base of a taller building. I think Morris's careful analysis of the base structure within the context of the cast iron typology was interesting and hard to, for me at least, to deny what he's come up with. It's interesting to me when I look at this building, I'm thinking it has proportions that are similar to another building, which I'm going to describe in a second. It's completely outside the district. So is this appropriate even to bring it up? I'm not sure, but it's a kind of an unusual typology, so maybe it is appropriate within the city. In about 1929, a very late McKim and White building for the Louis Sherry Ice Cream Company on Madison and 62nd, I think, was built. My firm had the privilege of adding to it twice, well, adding to it once for two different tenants. Once the flagship store for the Limited, and then that changed, and it was the flagship for Hermes for a while. It isn't now. But that one-story building before it got its top was very similar, I think, in proportions to this building. And is it okay to bring McKim and White into the proportions of this? I'm not exactly sure, but somehow we're designing a building. I think that's the important thing. We're not designing something from a kit of parts that one just pulls from adjoining context. So I think for me, at least as a designer, it is relevant to think about that building, and maybe others around town that do it too. I'm coming to the point, I think, where I think this is all kind of really kind of brilliantly done. The model was very helpful, even in its broken state, which the chair did. But I think I aided in passing it off in a clumsy way. But I think the model is very helpful because it shows the very sophisticated detailing, what am I trying to say? The depth of detailing, which I think would be very much appreciated. I will appreciate it because I often use this subway stop to get into the R train to go back south, but and it's really a mess now. So in any event, I'm having a hard time finding really much fault with this at all. And I think, of course, the restoration of the older building, once a federal building, actually, what is remarkable and will. I think it's just a great thing, actually, a great service to the city that that you have decided as an owner to undertake something rather than waiting another whatever how long to address this sad corner and not wait for some future market which may or may not ever appear. So I think I'm okay. I think I can approve it just as it is. Yeah. Yes, and the extension as well. Right.
Okay, and then the signs, which are,
I was thinking the signs are a little much and big. I still think that no matter what we approved across the street, they seem just a little too big to be so repetitive. I don't mind the repetition necessarily if they're smaller, and maybe if they're not smaller, they shouldn't be so many of them.
all right, Commissioner Lutfi.
So it's I do want to say that I think the approved building, that's not going to get built right now, given the market. And seeing it again, you did a great job. And it was going to be a wonderful addition and anchor to the corner, and architecturally, and also an important anchor from an economic development standpoint. And of course, it makes sense given, you know, the state of the office market, and just the state of the real estate market at the moment, that you would want to do something else. It is a property you're paying taxes on. Of course, why not make it an income generator? Who knows what it will ultimately become? Maybe it'll become residential at some point, and not commercial. I don't really look at the, having this be an anchor at the corner has it has a different kind of responsibility than the taller building did. I don't think we can expect this to take on that literally and figuratively, the load that we were asking your prior project to do. This fills a gap. It definitely, links, a continuum of the landscape and closes it off. But it certainly isn't as big of a statement, or can't be as big of a statement as it was in its prior design. I do think overall the project works. I think it's in many ways understated, and I think that it does. I like the idea of it speaking to the cast iron buildings in the district, and based on the broken model that has circulated amongst the commissioners, the detail really is quite nice. I think that the proportion issue here for me is that the two buildings that it connects to are lower. If it connected to two cast iron buildings, then the height would seem awkward, because the walls of those buildings would go much higher up. And in a way, those walls would anchor this. So, my sense is it could come down a little bit in height, so that it does really relate a little more to the two end buildings. I'm not saying, it has to be significant. It doesn't have to line up, but I think I think there's certainly enough ceiling height in there to work with from a commercial standpoint for this to work. And I also think the other thing is that your idea of, the transom at the doorway, which is a very common place in cast iron buildings. The concept of it, what happens in the cast iron buildings is it continues. So I feel like that's such a big expanse, even if you lowered a little bit of glass, that you almost need something to continue. And, in looking at the Muji building at 455, like, they made a gesture, and I think it works. And it's not as much of an expanse, but it's something on that building. And I thought it broke it up nicely. So that would be another thought. Of course, since you have 1 to 2 tenants only, it's really, you have to reduce the amount of signage. It's way too much, and it's hard to know what, once that's done. I mean, I think the size, we could pay a little more attention to what the sizes, or the staff could, working with the staff. And then I also think that it sounds like you want to try to get rid of that railing, which would be great. But if you can't, I would recommend that you do whatever you can to push it back as far as possible. And the work you're doing on the building next door is terrific.
Commissioner Chu?
Okay. So I think that the building, I can't remember the address, the one that's being affected with the brick facade is appropriate. What you're doing to restore the facade, you're rebuilding the storefront. It is in a more historic aesthetic than the corner building. I also agree if you can't get that rail moved, then set it back. I think my thoughts about this, and I keep looking at it, and I understand that your challenge as the designer doing this, because I understand why you put the larger mass on the corner to really hold that corner. And I'm listening to a lot of comments that were made about proportion and also the repetitiveness of the signage isn't helping. I think the scale, Fred's comment about the scale of the signage and the repetitiveness of it is not helping. I think that reducing the size would help. I'm trying to understand the scale because the sign is so big. I misunderstand how big the whole thing is. If they actually came smaller, the scale of the building would actually increase, which is what you want. You want some presence on the corner. My only thought here is proportion. And I wish that the bays weren't quite as square as they are in elevation. This looks more vertical, but on the elevations, they're almost perfect squares. And I like your interpretation of the cast irons of Soho, and I like your modern take on it. But the cast irons to me are always elegant and wonderful because they're very vertical and they also have a lot of depth. And so when I look at this, I keep looking at your dimensions and I wondered if you could cut another bay on the left side there because they're actually wider than the ones on the right side. Their wider bays are 18 and almost 19 feet wide on the left and 15 to 16 on the right. If you could get another bay, it might help slim it up and make it a little more elegant because I am responding to a huge expanse of glass, which may have a butt joint right down the middle there. And the amount of divisions you had to do to make the door entries on those two bays, which I think aren't as articulate as a cast iron is. You have the bay structure, which sets a good proportion, and then the infill has a lot of nice detail. I like the detailing you're doing to capture the window, to pop it forward, have the sign come forward a little with the recess. The depth is great. If you can get any depth, the most depth you can get, if those things could really pull apart, I think this would be a different picture because it would reflect the sidewalk pedestrian experience with a little bit more scale and depth. Because I'm responding to the flatness that I'm feeling on the corner, that cast irons have so much wonderful depth and the windows always set back behind the columns, articulation. So I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess what I'm saying is I wish there was a little more scale in the articulation. The massing overall height, I think is okay. And the materiality, the aluminum cast is pretty fancy stuff that you've got up there. And I think that can have a nice play of light and articulation that you're not getting in your rendering right here, frankly. Yeah, I'm just afraid about the mess that's inside those big windows more than what the architecture is outside.
Thank you, Commissioner Master.
Yeah, so I think that starting with the 3-story building, the rear yard, the rear addition, I think it's fine. I think it's a clever way of doing it. Removing the party wall, I think is fine, given that it's probably necessary to have that flexibility for your retail tenant. I don't have a problem with the railing because I don't think it's highly visible. And the signage, I also don't have a problem with, given this corner is heavily signed and very busy anyway. The only thing is, I agree with the other commissioners that you do have a vast expanse of glass. And even for me, who is a proponent of, giving your tenant as much glass as possible, the proportions seem off. There's something a little odd about it, and I don't really know how to fix it, but I think perhaps you could work with staff. I think Stephen had a couple suggestions, but I think that the expanse of glass is a little overwhelming for this corner.
Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I'm going to look at this from an urban design point of view. And there's a drawing, page 25, that solved the problem of this. I'm not opposed to the scale of the building. I think it's fine. I think the datums though are off. I think if we lowered the datum to align with the building to the right and to the building to the left, at least the sign data, that would take away any discussion of anything. The datums would align, the urban context, the corner would come alive. And I think that's fine. The amount of glass or the proportions of the columns, it's fine. It could be looked at again. The issue I have is what's the word they use? Draw attention to itself. I hear this about a lot. If I look at this elevation, the diagonal of the brick and the gray draws my eye absolutely to that void space, which is nothing to look at. And, it just, the diagonal itself draws attention, the formal thing. So just simplify that and don't draw my eye to it.
All right. Commissioner Chapin.
In general, I think the design is appropriate, and I think that having, fairly large windows is also appropriate. I feel like, as other commissioners have suggested, that they seem a little large because of the interrupted space. So I was sort of thinking if you had like just a little line running across like a transom, it might break it up without doing any damage to what they're trying to achieve, and could, work with the design, I think, fairly well. I think, it probably would be desirable to set the railing back a little bit, just because, normally you don't see a visible railing on top of, it's a very short building, obviously. But if it could be minimized a little bit, I think that would be desirable. And I don't have a problem with the signage or the color, and I think that the design in general is well conceived to try to, do a modern echo of the current, with the current building. So that's a modern echo of the historic features in the current building. So that's fine.
Great. And I think that's a good point, that it is a contemporary building, and so it can give some latitude in how it interprets the historic features. Commissioner Goldblum.
Thank you. I think that it's basically appropriate as is, with the caveat of reducing the sign font size. And I think that the signage along Broadway should be reduced in number, but Canal, because of its character as a very raucous place, I think can take the signage. But I do think that reducing the size a bit would be the better way to go. I think they said like 18 inches was the
For staff
level. I think that's a good guide. I think that while I'm okay with the design as it is, and I think it's quite, as others have said, quite articulate and as we would expect from Morris, very professional and very, very sharp and very interesting and creative kind of take on traditional architecture. I think Stephen's idea about adding a bay to the Canal Street facade would improve it. I don't think it's inappropriate as is. I think you could also look at taking that butt joint line, which will be quite a bit more prominent in real life than it is here, and maybe introducing that, elaborating that somewhat. That would also give it that more vertical expression that Stephen was shooting for. Make it into something instead of making it trying to suppress it. I agree that with his analysis that generally speaking, the rhythm along both Canal and Broadway usually more vertical than what this is. And I don't think that, again, it's not a disqualifier that this isn't following that pattern, but I do think that his suggestion would enhance the project if they would consider it.
Commissioner,
Wait a minute,
yeah.
one more thing. And in terms of the brick building, I think it's important that the brick stays diagonal. For the not be, and I agree with Everardo that it does draw your eye, but I think it's important because that's the historical volume of the building, and the recall of that is very, very important. And what bugs me about it is a little bit is that triple window. It kind of crowds right onto it and kind of brushes up to it. I'd say if you tighten those up a little bit, so they kind of gave a little bit more space to the brick, it wouldn't look like an accident. It would look like you were kind of interacting with and kind of elaborating on the original building. And I do think that as we commented on 14th Street and 8th Avenue, the BKSK building with the mid-block building where they were dealing with a lot of conjoined federal period townhouses, I think that some amount of the original sidewall should be retained at the interior of the conjoined spaces. I think it's, when you're dealing especially with a federal period building, its fabric, its volume should be retained. I think that the normally a rear yard addition of that scale would not be approved lightly. I think here it's okay because it's been so heavily modified over the years, but I think the expression of it is very important.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
I want to strongly agree with Commissioner Goldblum to keep the brick, and I think it's really important to differentiate the new from existing. I have to say I'm old enough to remember Nedick's in that corner. I wish you good luck with the fire department and the railings, but I don't mind the railings particularly as is. And in general, I think this is fine. Some of the suggestions are good, but I can argue it. I would say with the signage, and this probably goes back more to what Commissioner Bland said, is either smaller letters or fewer signs. And that can be worked out with staff when you know if it's one retail or multiple.
Okay, Commissioner Chen.
Yeah, so glad to see that this is literally turning the corner, even though it's a placeholder. This is a vital station. This is the key intersection of Broadway and Canal. And this is what a lot of visitors, include like Vice Chair Glenn just said, this is where people get their first exposure to what this neighborhood is like. And it's in the hands of a very good architect. And I think the detailing, too bad the audience on Zoom cannot see the model, is absolutely gorgeous, the detailing. I do share with some Commissioner Chu and Commissioner Mastro's suggestion. I think that the concern with the vast expanse of glass, I'm thinking that, and I also agree with Commissioner Goldblum about the size of the signage of the retail, but I think that signage transom band may be lowered and to be more consistent with the 3-story building to the right north of Broadway. And I agree about the good luck with the brick work. I hope they can recover the brickwork. And Commissioner Diana Chapin's comment about setting back if the handrail is mandatory, to set back the handrail a little bit to the degree. They should work with the staff. I mean, I'm not going to nitpick here, but I think this is a very, very important corner, and I hope they can deal with the graffiti, the plague of the graffiti here.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for your thoughtful comments. And I think where we are is I think there's a lot of support for this 1-story building on this corner. And as always, I think we've found that your careful approach is appropriate, both in terms of design and just sort of anchoring the corner as we've worked with you on other corners here. And the detailing and the level of articulation, I think, is all very beautifully thought out, as is the height. But there are some lingering comments about the overall kind of scale within that height and proportion. And it sort of, I think, goes to both the display windows as well as signage. And so maybe taking a little bit of time to just sort of tweak that and proportional study and think about how one might get a little more, maybe potentially verticality, and how the signage, whether signs get a little smaller or fewer. I think that sign study could be totally connected to the proportional study. And so we'll leave it open. There were a lot of suggestions around the table, but I think we don't want to just approve it, telling you what to do. I think we want to leave it up to you to come back to us with a response to that. Yes, Commissioner Bland.
Somehow I missed in the presentation, if it was said at all. That's why I got up to look. And yes, I do see that there is a butt joint for those large pieces of glass that you mentioned. I hadn't seen that. And it kind of gives away the idea a little bit. And you know, I know that you're not Jean Nouvel designing Jane's carousel, but large pieces of glass could be built. The problem with that could be that you design such a jewel box that we would never let it be torn down later. But but anyway, I think that's somehow that's bothering me, and now in a different way, because I think unless you can convince us that the butt joint is really like invisible, that's just like this tiny little detail that gives the whole thing away in a different way. And I hope that you think about that as you think about the things that.
Yeah. So I think just a little tweaking in the proportions, and we'll have you back as soon as you're ready. Great. Thank you so much. That's right, literally. I'm sorry about that, Morris. All right, so that concludes our morning session. We are now going to break for lunch. We'll come back at 1:15. We'll ask all members of the public to voluntarily exit the Zoom meeting at this time so that should you wish to return, you don't experience any technical difficulties that might occur if we remove you from the meeting. And we'll see everybody at 1:15. Thank you.